Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Today, we're going to get inside the mind of one of the true giants of modern business, Charlie Munger. Now, you might know him as Warren Buffett's partner, but he was so much more than that. He was really the architect behind the powerhouse that is Berkshire Hathaway. But listen, this isn't just an explainer about making money. It's about character, it's about clear thinking, and it's about this incredibly powerful idea of living a life that you judge, not one that the world judges for you. And who better to sum him up than Warren Buffett, the man who knew him best? This quote, it just gets right to the heart of who Charlie Munger was. You see, for him, it was never about the applause, the fame, or the fortune. It was about this deeply personal, internal compass that guided every single thing he did. And he had a name for it, the inner scorecard. All right, so let's dig in. What is this thing, this inner scorecard? Well, it was Munger's core philosophy. You could almost think of it as the operating system for his life. And it's the key to understanding how he became so ridiculously successful, while at the same time being almost completely indifferent to what most people think of as success. At its core, it's pretty simple. Success, for Munger, had absolutely nothing to do with what the outside world thought of him. It was all about measuring your own life against your own highest principles. The questions he asked himself were things like, am I acting with integrity? Am I thinking clearly and rationally? Am I building the kind of character I can respect? Whether the world was cheering him on or not was just noise. It was totally irrelevant. And when you see it laid out like this, the contrast is just wow. It's so powerful. Most of us, right, we're taught to chase the things on the right, the outer scorecard, a good reputation, public approval, fame, wealth. Munger flipped that completely on its head. He focused on the left column. His belief was if you take care of your integrity, a good reputation will probably follow. If you focus on being rational, you won't have to chase public approval. It's a huge shift in perspective from seeking validation from others to earning your own self-respect. And here's where you can really see that mindset in action. Just take the emotion of envy. I mean, think about it. Envy is the ultimate outer scorecard emotion. It literally cannot exist without you comparing your life to someone else's. Munger, with that relentless logic of his, just threw it in the trash. He thought, why would I ever engage with an emotion that has zero upside and its only purpose is to make me feel miserable? That is the inner scorecard, in its purest form, a logical, rational rejection of comparing yourself to others. So where does a philosophy like this even come from? I mean, it doesn't just pop up out of thin air, right? For Charlie Munger, it was forged way back in the heartland, in Omaha, Nebraska. That's where his character was shaped long, long before his fortune ever was. And Munger, he would tell you himself, it all goes back to Omaha. This wasn't just some cutesy saying for him. He meant it. That Midwestern pragmatism, the strong ethical grounding, that no-nonsense way of looking at the world, he believed it all came from the soil of his hometown. You have to picture the timeline here. He's born right in the middle of the boom times of the Roaring '20s. But then, bam, the Great Depression hits. When you grow up with that kind of contrast, it teaches you something really deep about how quickly fortunes can change. But even more important was his family. His grandfather was a highly respected judge, known for being incredibly fair. These weren't just abstract ideas for young Charlie. They were the men he looked up to every single day. You know, there's this one story from his childhood that just hits the nail on the head. His father was a lawyer, and he once said, kind of as a joke, but not really, that their family would starve if all his clients were as honorable as this one guy, a Mr. McFadden. For young Charlie, that lesson was immediate and it was profound. Go find the McFaddens of the world. Build your entire life and your career around people you can trust, people with unimpeachable integrity. Okay, so we've got this incredible ethical foundation, right? The inner scorecard. But that was only half of the equation for Munger. He paired that deep sense of morality with a truly awesome intellect. And his genius wasn't just that he was smart, it was how he thought, how he organized all his knowledge into what he famously called a latticework of mental models. It really begs the question, doesn't it? How do you actually become a world-class thinker? It's not just about acing a test or knowing a lot of facts in one narrow field. Munger's entire approach was his answer to this question, and it was all about building a toolkit for your mind that you could use on any problem, anywhere. So what in the world is this lattice work? Well, imagine knowledge isn't a bunch of separate boxes, like history over here and science over there. Instead, picture it like a woven grid, a lattice. Each big discipline, physics, psychology, economics, gives you a fundamental model, a different lens to see the world through. And by connecting all these models, you can look at a single problem from, say, 5 different angles and find a solution that's way more robust. And this isn't just a random list of college subjects. No. For him, it was a totally connected system. He'd use psychology to understand why people make crazy, irrational decisions with their money. He'd look at biology to understand how a business, like an ecosystem, either adapts or dies. He would pull from history to see the same human patterns play out again and again. These weren't separate tools. They all worked together. As he famously put it, if you only know your own field, you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. And his experience with physics in college really sums up his whole approach. He had no interest in becoming a physicist, but he was fascinated by how they solved problems. They always went back to the most fundamental principles. They cut through the noise to get to the root of the issue. That commitment to first principles thinking, it became a cornerstone of everything he did. All right, so that's the theory. Inner scorecard, lattice work of the mind. Sounds great. But what happens when the rubber meets the road? How did this wild combination of deep character and a multidisciplinary mind actually play out in the cutthroat world of high-stakes business? This is where you see it all come together. This story is, well, it's pure Munger. He had a longtime friend and business partner, Rick Guerin, who got into a tough financial spot and needed to sell his stake in a business they owned together. So Guerin runs the numbers and tells Munger he wants $200,000 for it. Now, Munger could have just said deal, shaken his hand, and walked away with a fantastic bargain. But he didn't. He looked his friend in the eye and told him his number was wrong. Then he delivered this all-time classic line, this perfect mix of intellectual confidence and unshakable integrity, and he proceeded to write him a check for $300,000, $100,000 more than the man asked for. Why? Because it was the right number. That's the inner scorecard, right there, completely overriding an easy chance for a quick profit. And his commitment to quality, man, it absolutely drove the businesses he and Buffett bought. The story from the See's Candy Factory is just legendary. They hire this new guy, an experienced candy maker, and he's walking through the factory looking totally confused. He finally asks the manager, "Where are your water pipes?" The manager just says, "We don't have any. We have a pipe for cream and a pipe for whipping cream." For Munger, that was it. That was the sign of a truly great business, a non-negotiable, absolute commitment to being the best. And once he found a gem like See's, a business built on that kind of quality and integrity, he held on for dear life. He absolutely hated what he called gin rummy management, this constant frenetic buying and selling of companies just to look busy or chase the latest hot trend. To him, that was a loser's game. The real genius was finding a great company run by great people and then just having the patience to sit back and let them work their magic for decades. And these principles weren't just for private deals. This guy was willing to take a very public and potentially very costly stand. Back during the savings and loan crisis, he saw the industry's lobbying group pushing for accounting rules that he saw as just flat out dishonest and dangerous. So what did he do? He didn't just complain behind the scenes. He publicly resigned his company's membership and wrote this blistering letter calling their actions disgraceful and comparing the whole league to a cancer. That's what integrity looks like when the pressure is on. So after all that, what's the takeaway? What's the blueprint here? Because Munger's life really offers more than just investing tips. It gives us a framework for a more rational, a more effective life, one that's built on a foundation of accountability and just plain old common sense. These were the actual rules his kids grew up with. And man, they are as direct as it gets. You notice the theme, right? It's all about total personal responsibility. Your word is everything. What you do matters infinitely more than why you didn't do it. There are no excuses. It's just a simple, incredibly powerful code for how to operate in the world and earn respect, especially from the one person who matters most, yourself. And really, it all kind of culminates in this one final powerful piece of Munger wisdom. He believed that in life and in business, you don't get thousands of great opportunities. You get a handful if you're lucky. The whole point of building that lattice work, of honing your mind, is to have the wisdom to actually recognize a truly great idea when it finally crosses your path. And when it does, you have to have the guts to bet big. So in the end, Munger's entire life points back to one single powerful question for all of us. Forget about the job title, the bank account, the number of followers for just a second. When you're the one grading yourself by your own highest standards, what are the rules that really matter? What's written on your inner scorecard? When you think of Berkshire Hathaway, one name probably pops in your head right away: Warren Buffett. But behind the Oracle of Omaha, there was another giant, a man who, believe it or not, called himself a mere footnote in history. Well, today, we're pulling that footnote right out of the margins and putting it center stage. This is the story of Charlie Munger and the absolutely extraordinary partnership that changed the world of investing forever. I mean, listen to this. These are Charlie Munger's own words back in 1993, right when he first landed on the Forbes list of richest Americans. He genuinely saw himself as a supporting character, a secondary figure, in a story that was all about Warren Buffett. It's a remarkably humble thing to say, especially coming from a man who was anything but a minor detail. And here's the punchline. This number is the perfect way to see that paradox in action. Just 5 years after calling himself a footnote, Munger's personal fortune was sitting at over $1.2 billion. So the question is, how does a footnote become a billionaire? That's what we're going to unpack right now. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with this whole paradox of the billionaire who wanted to stay anonymous. Then we'll go back in time to the fateful dinner where it all started. We'll dive into their unique mental partnership, see how their totally different personalities actually created this amazing synergy, uncover the many, many faces of Charlie Munger, and finally, we'll boil it all down to his powerful core philosophy for success. Okay, first things first, let's really get into this fascinating push and pull with Munger, this immense, world-changing influence on one hand, and his deep desire to stay just out of the public spotlight on the other. He wasn't just successful, he was actively trying not to be noticed for it. It's wild. And this just shows you how serious he was about his privacy. Munger literally had a goal to fly under the radar, to keep his name off that famous list. But while his own talent, his own business savvy made that completely impossible. In the end, his strategy to stay anonymous was, you could say, a spectacular failure. And just to put his wealth into perspective, let's take a look at that 1998 Forbes list. Munger ranked above Michael Eisner, the celebrated CEO of Disney at the time. He was wealthier than the hotel heir William Barron Hilton. And maybe the most surprising one on this list, he ranked higher than Steve Jobs, the visionary behind Apple and Pixar. This wasn't footnote money. This was titan of industry money. So how did this powerhouse partnership even happen? Well, it didn't start in a boardroom or on Wall Street. It started over dinner, right in their shared hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. Although the seeds for that meeting, they were planted a little bit earlier. Picture this. It's 1957. A young Warren Buffett is trying to get a prominent local doctor, Edwin Davis, to invest $100,000 with him. The doctor barely seems to be listening, but at the end, he says yes. When Buffett asks him why, Dr. Davis gives this simple answer. You remind me of Charlie Munger. Buffett had never even met the guy, but he said later, I like him already. And that connection in Dr. Davis's mind, it only got stronger and, honestly, pretty funny over time. As he got older, he actually started making his investment checks out to Charlie Munger, even though the money was for Buffett. It's a great little anecdote that shows just how linked their identities became, even before they officially teamed up. So it all came to a head in 1959. 2 years after first hearing Munger's name, Buffett finally got his chance. Munger came back to Omaha after his father passed away. The children of that same Dr. Davis set up a dinner party, and for the very first time, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were in the same room. The result? Someone who was there said it was electric, an instant, undeniable connection. And that feeling was absolutely mutual. Munger, who was known for being pretty reserved and careful with his judgments, was just completely blown away. He saw the genius in Buffett right away. This wasn't some relationship that had to grow over time. It was a bond that was forged in a single evening. That instant connection very quickly became one of the most powerful collaborations in the history of business. They didn't have contracts, they didn't have formal titles, not at first anyway. They had something much, much more valuable. They had a mental partnership. That's what they called it, a mental partnership. Buffett himself called it a brother act. And the key here is that it was built completely on trust and intellectual respect. It was a true meeting of the minds, a constant conversation that just grew and grew with every deal and every discussion. And the timing of this meeting was just perfect. Munger had just lost his father. At the exact same time, Buffett's own mentor, the legendary investor Benjamin Graham, had retired. Buffett really felt that loss. He needed a new intellectual sparring partner, someone to bounce ideas off of. And Munger showed up at the exact right moment. And they were absolutely united by this powerful, shared ambition. But what's so telling is the reason behind it. It wasn't about flashy cars or fancy houses. For both Munger and Buffett, getting rich was a means to an end. And that end was independence, the freedom to think for themselves, to live life on their own terms. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. While they shared these deep core values and goals, on the surface, these two men could not have been more different. And it's right there, in those differences, that you find the magic of their partnership. I mean, just look at this contrast. It's striking. You have Buffett, famous for his simple, folksy stories, and then you have Munger, who loved big words and complex academic ideas. Buffett couldn't care less about clothes. Munger was known as a really natty dresser. Buffett still lives in the first house he ever bought. Munger, who loved architecture, owned 7. Even their politics were opposites. Buffett, a Democrat, and Munger, a die-hard Republican. So how in the world did that work? Well, Munger himself kind of shot down that old cliche that opposites attract. His philosophy was much more practical. He believed that if you're doing complicated work, you need colleagues. You need that challenge. Just the simple act of having to explain your thoughts to get them in order for someone else you respect, that is an incredibly useful discipline. It sharpens your own thinking. And this complexity, this sort of collection of contradictions, wasn't just in the partnership. It was inside Munger himself. Depending on who you asked, you get a completely different picture of the man. He was like a series of walking contradictions. So it really begs the question, right? Who was the real Charlie Munger? Was he that curmudgeonly guy we saw on stage at the Berkshire meetings every year? Or was he something else entirely? Just think about all these different perspectives. To his stepson, he was a dedicated, caring mentor. To the folks at Salomon Brothers, he was a hard-nosed board member who demanded accountability. To women's rights supporters, he was a hero who helped get the ball rolling on legalizing abortion. To his rivals, a billionaire bully. To boat designers, he was a total pushover for a crazy idea. And to the public, he was just the gruff sidekick. The truth is, he was all of these things at once. So how do we tie all this together? Munger actually had a name for what happens when you combine a bunch of powerful factors that are all pointing in the same direction. He called it the Lollapalooza effect. It's a term for when all these different forces combine to create an extraordinary result, something way beyond what any single one of them could have done on its own. And this effect was guided by a few core principles. And here's his philosophy, boiled down into 3 deceptively simple steps. First, live within your income and save money so you can invest it. That's the foundation. Second, commit to being a lifelong learner. Develop mental discipline and go learn whatever it is you need to learn to get ahead. And third, and this is a big one, always, always behave honorably. Because, as Munger put it, how you behave in one part of your life will help you in surprising ways down the road. In the end, the story of Charlie Munger isn't just about money. It's a story about the incredible power of an intellectual partnership, about the discipline of challenging your own ideas, and about the amazing results you can get when you find the right person to sharpen your thinking. So it leaves us with one final thought. Every great mind needs a sounding board. Who's the Charlie Munger in your life? So when you think of a billionaire investor like Charlie Munger, you probably picture, boardrooms, stock charts, that whole world. But if you really want to understand the man behind the money, we've got to go somewhere else entirely. We're going to this one single place he cherished, a rustic little island on the lake in Minnesota that, believe it or not, tells you pretty much everything you need to know about who he was. And this quote just sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? It completely captures that dry, witty, but deeply practical spirit of Charlie Munger. Here's a guy who absolutely mastered the world of finance, but he never, ever lost sight of what actually has real value in life. And this is the incredible contrast that defined him. I mean, on one hand, you've got the financial titan, right? The vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. And on the other, a guy who was a passionate fisherman who literally ordered lures he saw on TV fishing shows and who was the head of this huge, sprawling, and kind of chaotic family. So let's dive into the one place where those two sides of Charlie Munger always came together. A place called Star Island. Okay, so let me paint you a picture. Our story starts in the last summer of the 20th century. Charlie and his wife Nancy Munger are climbing out of a motorboat onto a dock at their Minnesota lake house. And they're just immediately surrounded by this chattering swarm of their kids and grandkids. His 3-year-old granddaughter grabs his hand, trying to pull him away. It's just this scene of warm, wonderful family chaos. But then, a voice cuts through all the noise from the kitchen. It's a message that reminds you, even out here in the middle of nowhere, the outside world and his legendary business partner, Warren Buffett, is always just a phone call away. But first things first. Before he even thinks about that phone call, Charlie has his priorities straight. He's directing the luggage, making sure this big, awkward bag of fishing rods gets handled carefully. His houseman holds up a sturdy plastic bait box, a box he checked as luggage on a 3-leg flight, and he proudly announces, "Not dented." And what's inside? A whole collection of brand new lures that this billionaire just had to have after seeing them on a TV fishing show. You gotta love it. Okay, now he turns to the phone. The kitchen is just buzzing with like 30 family members. There's clatter, there's talking. A granddaughter is very seriously peeling carrots nearby. And amidst all this, he just grabs a cordless phone, finds a semi-quiet corner, and casually dials up the Sage of Omaha to talk about some massive business deal. It's just this surreal mashup of two completely different worlds colliding in one kitchen. So the real question here is, why? Why this place? Why was this rustic, out-of-the-way island so incredibly important to this powerful man and to his entire family? Well, Star Island isn't just a dot on a map. It's practically a main character in the Munger family story. It is remote. You can only get there by boat. There are no roads, just hiking trails winding through a really dense forest. It's the kind of place where all the noise from the outside world just fades away, and family is all that's left. And what a family it is. We're talking a big blended clan, a real mix of his, hers, and theirs. With 8 kids and 15 grandkids scattered all over the place, Star Island became the one constant. It was the one place, for one time a year, where they could all actually be together. And his daughter, Wendy Munger, she just puts it perfectly. She said that for most of the year, her dad was this super ambitious, work-focused guy. But on the island, he was just there. He was fully present. This was where they really got to have him, where they'd go fishing, build fires, and just create these memories that really became the bedrock of their family. But this incredible connection, it didn't just appear overnight. Oh no. This is a story that goes back almost 100 years, long before anyone was talking about billions of dollars. The Munger story on this island starts all the way back in 1932. Charlie's grandparents came up here to get away from the brutal Nebraska summer heat. Then his dad, Al, bought the first cabin in the 40s. And get this, they didn't even have electricity until 1951, and telephones, not until the 1980s. This was a place where roughing it was just how it was. And the beginnings were so incredibly humble. Back in 1946, after his grandmother passed away, Charlie's dad took a small inheritance and bought the original house. And the price? Just $5,600. It's a world away from the kinds of numbers Charlie Munger would be dealing with later in his life. And life there was primitive. I mean, truly. We're talking outdoor toilets, a couple of sinks, that's it. And this was a huge challenge for Charlie's mother, a woman named Tootie. His sister said their dad, who was a big outdoorsman, absolutely loved it. But Tootie, not so much. She couldn't swim and was petrified of mice. And yet every single summer, she made that trip out of pure love for her kids and grandkids. So it's in this exact environment, surrounded by family, far away from the pressures of city life in Omaha, that you really start to see the core of Charlie Munger's personality begin to show itself. And there is no story that illustrates this better than what we're going to call the rat incident. Okay, so picture a very young Charlie out for a walk with his mom. He'd already figured out that she had this deep, deep fear of rodents. So what does he do when he spots a dead rat by the road? Well, naturally, he picks it up, dangles it in front of her, and asks all innocently, "Mother, what's this?" Of course, she turns and runs, and he chases her down the road with the rat. Munger himself loved to tell this story, and he'd recall with a big laugh that it was the only time his mother ever chased him with a coat hanger. It's just this perfect early peek into that playful, kind of provocative nature that would become one of his trademarks. And this wasn't, a one-off thing. Poor Tootie Munger also had to put up with his little entrepreneurial phase when he decided to start raising hamsters in the basement. At one point, he had about 35 of them. His sister said they squeaked like crazy and eventually smelled so bad that his mother finally put her foot down and made him get rid of them all. But, of all the stories from the lake, the most legendary one, the absolute Hall of Famer, it involves his most important partner, Warren Buffett, and a fishing trip that went spectacularly, hilariously wrong. Okay, here's the play-by-play. Charlie, Warren, and their buddy Rick Guerin are out on the lake. First, Charlie insists on driving the boat. Classic Charlie. Then, to get himself into a better spot for casting, he throws the motor in reverse. Well, water immediately starts pouring over the back of the boat. Guerin is yelling at him, and Charlie just says, "I'll take care of that." And his solution? He jams the throttle to full power while it's still in reverse. The boat goes straight down, dunking all three of them into Cass Lake. And Rick Guerin's description of that moment is just priceless. He said as he and Buffett popped up to the surface right next to each other, Warren's eyes were as big as his glasses. Can't you just picture the Oracle of Omaha sputtering there in a Minnesota lake, just thinking, what just happened? And that little mishap, well, it earned Charlie the lifelong nickname Admiral Munger. And that little fishing trip was the last time Warren Buffett ever set foot on Star Island. Munger had his own theory about why. He used to joke that it wasn't just getting dunked in the lake that scared Buffett away for good. It was the fact that later that night, to try and cheer him up, they made him sit and watch a bunch of high school kids perform French theater in a tent. And anyone who knows Warren Buffett knows that is just not his scene. So what does all this tell us? All these stories, the family chaos, the boyish pranks, the sunken fishing boats. What does it really say about Charlie Munger and this place that was so special to him? And this, right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. Star Island was so much more than a vacation spot. It was the anchor for his entire life. It's the place where the little boy who chased his mom with a rat could be the same person as the man who sank a boat with Warren Buffett. It was the rope that tied his past, his present, and his future all together in one place. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? We all have these places that shape who we are, places that hold our memories and connect all the different versions of ourselves through the years. So I'll just give you with this question to chew on. What is the place that defines you?
Let's talk about Charlie Munger. You know the name. The legendary investor, the other half of Berkshire Hathaway. A truly brilliant mind. But if you really want to understand the man, you've got to understand where he came from. Today, we're going to dig into how a boy from the heartland, from Omaha, Nebraska, became one of the sharpest thinkers in the business world.
And Munger himself would be the first to tell you that. He always credited his hometown. He believed deep down that the values, the character, the grounding he got in Nebraska was the bedrock of who he became. It's a powerful thing to say, right? Tying your whole identity to the place you grew up. But what if that wasn't the whole story?
And bam, right there, from his own daughter quoting his best friend Warren Buffett, you get the central puzzle of Charlie Munger. Was he a product of his environment, something that Omaha predictably created, or was he a complete and total lightning strike, an anomaly? It really makes you wonder, was he made by Omaha, or was he just in Omaha?
So, to figure this out, we first need to get a feel for Omaha itself back in Munger's day. We're not talking about just any city. This place was a crucible, a kind of pressure cooker at the edge of the American frontier that forged a very, very specific kind of person.
Okay, so try to picture Omaha in the early 20th century. It's the gateway to the West, a tough, rugged place. And I mean tough. Summers could hit 100 degrees, and the winters, we're talking 40 below. Just living there, just surviving that, was a character-building experience in itself.
And look, make no mistake, Nebraska has churned out some incredible people. You've got trailblazers like Buffalo Bill Cody, entertainers like Johnny Carson and Fred Astaire, actors like Marlon Brando, even pivotal figures like Malcolm X. So yeah, this place clearly forged character. But even in that amazing company, Buffett's point still stands out. There just wasn't anyone else quite like Charlie. So if it wasn't just the city, what else was going on?
Well, the answer, or at least a huge piece of it, starts with his family. See, Charlie Munger wasn't the product of one single set of values. He was this incredible collision of two powerful and powerfully different family lines. And understanding this contrast, well, it's absolutely key to understanding the man.
So here it is, laid out plain and simple. It's like you have two competing tribes in his DNA.
On his dad's side, you've got the Mungers. Think pioneer stock, super conservative with money, Republican, Presbyterian, the whole 9 yards. But then, on his mother's side, you have the Russells and the Inghams. They were intellectuals, politically progressive, Wilsonian Democrats, and Unitarians. Can you just imagine being a kid at that dinner table, soaking in both of those worldviews? It's the perfect recipe for a mind that learns to hold two opposing ideas at the same time.
All right, let's start with the Munger side. And the patriarch, the main guy here, was his grandfather, Judge T.C. Munger. For the judge, life was all about discipline and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. To him, a book like Robinson Crusoe wasn't just some adventure story. No way. It was a moral textbook, a how-to guide for conquering the world through pure grit. That was the Munger way.
And Judge Munger didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. This guy dragged his family out of poverty and became so respected that Teddy Roosevelt, the Teddy Roosevelt, appointed him a federal judge. He was a man of strict moral standards who believed work kept you young, and he taught his kids to face their responsibilities head-on, no excuses. You can draw a straight line from that philosophy to the discipline we all saw in Charlie Munger.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin. But on his mom's side, the Inghams and the Russells, it was a completely different vibe. While the Mungers were focused on conquering the external world, this side of the family was all about cultivating your inner world. Their family motto says it all. The focus wasn't just on work, it was on high thinking. This is where the intellectual curiosity comes from.
And the story of his great-grandfather, Captain Ingham, is the perfect example. Now, he was a pioneer, just like the Mungers. I mean, the guy started out in a literal sod house, a house made of dirt and grass. He became a successful banker, but here's the kicker. For him, success wasn't just about piling up money. It was about what you did with it. He helped pay for the town library. That tells you everything, right? The whole point of becoming successful was to help other people get smarter.
So you had these two massive, powerful influences from his grandparents. But maybe the most direct, day-to-day influence on young Charlie came from his own dad, Alfred Munger, or Al, as everyone called him.
You know, it's really telling how Charlie talked about his father. He didn't say, "Oh, my dad was a genius," or "he was super rich." No, he called his dad one of the happiest men who ever lived. He was successful on his own terms. He had the family he wanted, great friends, and he just handled trouble with this incredible grace and calm. What a fantastic role model for a kid.
And Warren Buffett told this one story that just perfectly captures the kind of unconditional loyalty Al had for his son. I mean, think about that for a second. It's not about saying the bad thing you did was okay. It's about saying, I am on your side no matter what. We will sort out the right and wrong of this tomorrow. But right now, tonight, I've got your back. That kind of psychological safety is just an incredible gift to give your child.
And you can feel how deep that respect went from this one simple, powerful act. For years after his father died, Charlie carried his briefcase to work. It was engraved with both of their names. That wasn't just a practical thing, you know. That was a daily tribute. It was Charlie's way of keeping his dad with him every single day.
Now, all this family stuff, it wasn't happening in some happy little bubble. The whole dynamic was tested by one of the toughest times in American history. The Great Depression wasn't just some backdrop to Charlie's childhood, its lessons were burned into his brain.
Let's just pause and try to wrap our heads around that number. $30 billion. Just gone, vanished in a matter of weeks. The scale of that financial collapse is almost impossible for us to imagine. It just created this constant environment of fear and insecurity and genuine hardship for millions of people.
And this is where those family values we were talking about really got put to the test. This wasn't just talk. His grandfather, Russell, literally sawed his own house in half to make room for family members who had lost everything. And Judge Munger, the super careful, financially conservative patriarch, he risked half of his own net worth to save his son-in-law's bank. Can you imagine seeing that as a kid? The lesson is crystal clear. In a crisis, you do whatever it takes to take care of your own.
And here's a little twist of fate for you. Where does young Charlie Munger get his first real job? At a little grocery store called Buffett & Son. Yep, owned by Warren Buffett's grandfather. It's pretty incredible, right? And this wasn't some cushy summer internship. This was real work.
Charlie's own description of that job pretty much sums it all up. Basically, you worked all day for peanuts, your boss's opinion was the only one that mattered, and you absolutely could not afford to be foolish or mess around. It was a brutal but incredibly effective way to learn the fundamentals of business from the ground up.
Get this,
For a full 12-hour day of work on a Saturday, he was paid $2. Two. And at the end of the day, he had to give 2 pennies of it back for his Social Security. I mean, talk about learning the value of a dollar the hard way. An experience like that gets burned into your memory. It's really no wonder he was famously frugal for the rest of his life. So, we've got the competing family legacies. We've got the harsh reality of the Depression. The final piece of this whole puzzle is the boy himself, the raw material. What was young Charlie actually like?
Well, by all accounts, he was a real piece of work. He was brilliant, no doubt about it, skipped a grade, aced all the tough problems. But he wasn't just smart. He was a smarty. You know, the kind of kid who loved to challenge his teachers. And his heroes? Most kids have baseball players on their walls. Charlie had a picture of Thomas Jefferson over his bed when he was 7. He was just this incredible sponge, soaking up everything. Law from his dad, medicine and statistics from his dad's doctor friend. He was building that famous latticework of mental models before he even knew what to call it.
Which brings us right back to where we started. You can see all the ingredients that made Charlie Munger, can't you? You've got the discipline from his grandfather, the intellectual curiosity from his mother's side, the unconditional loyalty from his father, and the harsh lessons of the Depression. They're all there. But as Warren Buffett said, there were no others like him in Omaha. So was he simply the result of this perfect storm of influences? Or was there just something innate in him that was always going to be one of a kind? That, right there, is the question his incredible life makes us ask.
You know, when you hear the name Charlie Munger, you probably think of the brilliant, sharp-witted partner to Warren Buffett, a titan of investing, right? But behind that public image, there's a hidden story of just profound hardship. A story of a man who fought a series of brutal personal wars and somehow came out not just intact, but stronger. So today we're going to explore this lesser-known chapter of his life, surviving the wars, to really understand the man behind the legend.
And get this, his own daughter, Molly, once described him as a poker player who keeps his cards close. And honestly, that's the perfect way to look at his life. Munger was a master of emotional discipline, a trait that was forged in crucibles most of us can barely even imagine. Like any great poker player, he almost never showed his hand, especially when the stakes were deeply, deeply personal.
So to understand how he survived, we first have to get inside his head and understand how he thought. And that way of thinking, it wasn't shaped in some fancy business school. No, it was forged in the worlds of science and games of chance, long before he ever bought a single stock. Our story really kicks off not with money, but with this fundamental search for a better way to solve problems. It's a journey that would take him all the way from the plains of Nebraska to the front lines of intellectual discovery.
So he heads off to study math, right? Seems like a pretty logical path for a guy with a mind like his. But then, this one required introductory course he had to take would just completely reroute his entire way of thinking and give him a framework he'd use for the rest of his life.
That's how Munger put it, a total eye-opener. But here's the thing that's so interesting, it wasn't the laws of thermodynamics or anything like that grabbed him. It was the method. He was just blown away by the relentless, fundamental way that physicists would break down these incredibly complex problems to their absolute core. And this way of thinking led him to what he called his favorite word, assiduity. Sounds kind of old school, right? But what it means is, well, it's brutally simple and effective. It's just sheer, dogged persistence. You sit down and you stay with a problem until it is solved. No shortcuts. And for him, this wasn't just some academic idea. It became a philosophy for life.
Well, pretty soon, World War II interrupted his studies. And here, Munger's luck was just incredible. Think about this. While almost 1 million Americans were either killed or wounded, he was trained as a meteorologist and stationed way up in Nome, Alaska, about as far from the fighting as you could possibly get. He was spared the battlefield, but the military would teach him about a totally different kind of warfare.
So what did he do in the army? He played cards, a lot of cards, and poker taught him a discipline that would literally define his entire investment career. He learned to fold a bad hand early, to cut his losses without letting his ego get in the way. But more importantly, he learned that when a rare, high-probability opportunity, what he called a big edge, came along, you bet big, you bet heavily.
So the war ends, and Munger just comes out of the gate flying. I mean, he was a man in an absolute hurry. He basically compressed a decade of major life decisions into just a few short years, driven by this ambition that was both his greatest asset and, for a time, his biggest liability. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's wild. He enlists, he gets married at 21, then he somehow talks his way into Harvard Law without even having an undergraduate degree, and then boom, he moves clear across the country to California to start his career. All of that in the span of about 6 years. This was a man sprinting towards the life he imagined for himself.
But all that speed, man, it came at a price. His daughter Molly just nails it when she talks about his first marriage to Nancy Huggins. It was this whirlwind romance born out of the urgency of wartime. Two high spirits who, as she said, really had no idea what they were doing. And that decision made in such a hurry would soon unravel completely.
But on the professional front, his bets were paying off big time. Even though he got into Harvard in a really unconventional way, he absolutely crushed it, graduating near the very top of his class. And then he made another calculated bet, choosing the booming city of Los Angeles over his hometown of Omaha because he was convinced it was the faster track to success.
And yeah, for a while there, it looked like he had it all figured out. But that momentum he'd built up so fast was about to slam into a brick wall. The guy who'd been protected from the Great Depression and spared the battlefield was now about to face his own private, brutal wars.
You know, we think of the 1950s in America as this golden age, right? Happy days, prosperity. For Charlie Munger, it was the exact opposite. It was the darkest decade of his life. Everything he had been building with such incredible speed and intensity just started to crumble.
So that marriage he rushed into, the bill came due. In 1953, at just 29 years old, he gets divorced. And the financial fallout, it was just catastrophic. His wife got the house, she got pretty much everything else. He went from being this promising young lawyer to a guy living in what his daughter called dreadful bachelor digs, basically starting over from absolute zero. But here's what tells you everything you need to know about the guy. Even at his absolute lowest point, his character, his wit, it was still there. He was driving this terrible, repainted yellow Pontiac, a clear sign of how broke he was, and his daughter asked him about the embarrassing car. His response? A flash of humor and pride right in the face of humiliation. He wasn't just surviving, he was holding on to his dignity.
As gut-wrenching as the divorce and financial ruin were, it was about to get so much worse. We're talking about a tragedy that is almost impossible to imagine. This was the trial that would truly test the limits of his will.
His son, Teddy, was diagnosed with leukemia, and you have to put yourself back in that time. This is the early 1950s. There were no bone marrow transplants, no real treatments. For a kid with leukemia, there was no hope. It wasn't a fight you could win. It was a death sentence, a slow, inevitable decline.
The poker face was gone. This account from a friend, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Here was this brilliant, stoic man, completely and utterly powerless. All he could do was go in and hold his dying son and then walk out into the streets to weep all alone. It's an image of just pure, private agony.
1 year after his diagnosis, Teddy Munger died. He was just 9 years old.
Okay, so let's just take stock here. Divorced, flat broke, and he's just buried his own son. That's not just rock bottom, that's a place most people never come back from. Munger endured all three. And what he did next, well, that's the true measure of the man. He began to rebuild.
And this is what is so absolutely incredible. His daughter Molly said that through all of this, she never saw him as anything but a success. While he was privately going through this unimaginable pain, he projected this aura of total confidence to his kids. He refused to let his grief define him or his family's future. It was just an unbelievable act of will.
And then, slowly, things started to turn. He meets Nancy Barry Borthwick, who was also a divorcee with 2 children, and together they started a new chapter. They blended their families and finally started building that large, stable, and happy home that he had always dreamed of.
So what's the lesson here? What do you take away from all that pain, all that loss? Well, for Munger, it wasn't something to be buried or forgotten. No, he metabolized it. He turned it into a core philosophy for living a rational, effective life, even when everything is chaos.
And this right here, this quote, is pretty much his entire philosophy for survival boiled down to one sentence. The world is going to deal you terrible blows. That's a guarantee. The first tragedy isn't your fault, but allowing that tragedy to destroy the rest of your life through bitterness or despair or self-pity, that's a second tragedy, a self-inflicted one. And that, he decided, was just unacceptable.
Look, Charlie Munger's story, it really forces you to think, doesn't it? It goes so far beyond investing or making money. It shows you that the most valuable assets we can ever acquire are resilience and perspective. And those things are almost always forged in the fires of our deepest losses. It leaves all of us with a really powerful question to think about in our own lives. How do we stop one tragedy from becoming two?
Okay, so when you hear the name Charlie Munger, you think investing titan, right? Of course you do. But today, we're going to dig into a story you probably haven't heard. This isn't about the stock market. Nope. It's about how he had to put his entire life back together piece by piece. And this quote, man, it just nails who he was at his core. He was a gambler, but not in the Las Vegas sense. He loved figuring things out, making a call and seeing if he was right. But here's the thing. The biggest, most incredible bet he ever made had absolutely nothing to do with money. It was a bet on himself. So where do we start this story of reconstruction? Well, it begins in a pretty tough spot. It kicks off after a period of really deep personal loss that basically forced him to start from scratch, a brand new beginning. It's 1955, and a blind date, of all things, turns out to be the spark for everything that came next. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This was the moment, people say, he walked from a dark place into a bright field of new possibilities. Just amazing. You see, that meeting wasn't just some random date. It was the beginning of a partnership that would become the absolute anchor for the rest of his life. And that's exactly what we're talking about next, the perfect partnership. All right, check this out. It's so fascinating because they weren't alike at all. They were what you'd call perfect complements. You had Charlie, the classic absent-minded professor, right? The big idea guy, maybe a little impulsive with the checkbook. And then you had Nancy. She was the steady hand, incredibly frugal, basically the CFO of their entire life. She made sure all those brilliant ideas had a rock-solid foundation to stand on. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't just us looking back and guessing. Their own daughter, Molly, says the exact same thing. She saw it up close. She saw how Nancy's calm, stable presence was the structure that let Charlie's genius just take off. Nancy wasn't just in the background. She was the operational core of their whole world. And let's be crystal clear about something. Nancy was an absolute force of nature. This wasn't a story of someone just supporting a genius from the sidelines. No. She was a genius. Think about it. A Stanford economics major, a Phi Beta Kappa honoree who worked on designs for supersonic aircraft. On top of that, an amazing painter and cook. She was his intellectual equal in every single way. Okay, so their partnership was incredible, but it wasn't just about the two of them. Together, they took on this just immense challenge, a challenge that would totally define them as a unit. Which brings us to forging a blended family. I want you to just let that number sink in for a minute. 8. 8 kids. They didn't just start a new family, they merged two families that already existed and then added more kids to the mix. A his, hers, and ours household with 8 children. I mean, can you even imagine the complexity? And you know, it wasn't easy. Not by a long shot. This quote here from Nancy's son Hal, it's just so raw and honest. He's talking about being a little boy and suddenly feeling like his world, his territory, was being invaded, that he was being deposed. You can just feel the turmoil in those words. So how on earth did they navigate that? How did they pull it off? Well, it seems to have happened in 3 stages. First, there was conflict. You had this pugnacious, scrappy kid testing the boundaries of his new stepfather. Then came discipline. And this is key. Charlie didn't back down. He stepped up. He became a father. And finally, out of all that struggle, came unity. A real family was forged. The lines blurred and those labels like stepchild they just melted away. And the results? Well, the proof is right here, in Hal's own words. This is the ultimate testament to what they built. The same boy who felt like he was being deposed now sees Charlie as his father in every single way that matters, crediting him for the man he became. That is an absolutely incredible transformation. So they built this amazing unified family. But how? What was the secret sauce? What was the code they lived by? That's what brings us to the lessons from the Mungers. Now, these weren't your typical fuzzy motivational posters you see on an office wall. These were hard and fast rules. Do your best, period. Never tell a lie. Leave early for the meeting. And my personal favorite, straight from Hal, nobody gives a shit about an excuse. I mean, how direct is that? This was the practical, no-nonsense code of the Munger household. And here's the most important part. This wasn't stuff they lectured the kids about. It was all done by example. This ethical code, these rules, they were just woven into the fabric of their daily life. The kids learned it because they saw their parents living it, day in and day out.
Now, here's what's truly mind-blowing. While all of this incredibly intense family building is going on, Charlie is simultaneously fighting a war on a completely different front, his career. And that journey was every bit as tough. Which brings us to his early business struggles. This timeline here, this really shows a period that was a pure trial by fire for Munger. Back in the 50s, he gets into this transformer business. And what happens next is basically a slow-motion train wreck. We're talking mountains of debt, brutal competition, and even a tragic illness hitting a key person in the company. It was this multi-year nightmare that he barely got out of with his shirt on his back. And Charlie himself was incredibly blunt about just how brutal it was. Listen to his own words. He had troubles that made his hair fall out. They damn near lost everything. Can you imagine that kind of pressure? All while trying to forge a new family with 8 kids at home. It's almost unbelievable. But that painful failure, it taught him a lesson that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He used this fantastic Mark Twain story about a cat. The cat sits on a hot stove once, right? And after that, it'll never sit on a stove again, not even a cold one. For Charlie, that transformer business was his hot stove. It taught him in a very painful way to stay the hell away from complicated high-tech businesses where he didn't have a massive advantage. And this, right here, is the golden nugget of wisdom that came out of all that pain and struggle. It's his definition of a good business, and it is beautifully simple. A good business, he realized, isn't one that's complicated. It's one that's simple. It's a business that just keeps throwing up one easy decision after another. A bad business, that's the one that forces you into one agonizing, painful decision after another. That one simple idea would go on to make him billions. So, after hearing all this, we're left with a pretty big question, aren't we? We all love to celebrate the boardroom genius, the incredible investor. But when you put these two stories side by side, the building of a family and the brutal lessons from failure, you really have to wonder, how much of that legendary success was actually built not in the boardroom, but in the home? How much of it was built not on complex spreadsheets, but on the solid foundation of a resilient, supportive family? It's a really powerful idea to think about. You know, before Charlie Munger was the Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's legendary right-hand man, he was a lawyer, and he kind of stumbled into real estate. It was this short 5-project career that, believe it or not, made him his first $1 million. But way more important than the money were the lessons he learned, lessons that would literally shape his entire approach to investing. So let's dig into how these early deals really forged the legend. This quote, man, it just perfectly captures the vibe of Charlie Munger's early career. The stakes were incredibly high. He wasn't just playing around or trying to make a quick buck. He was building the foundation for his entire life. He was the rabbit, and the lessons he learned were all about survival. And then, how to thrive when the odds are stacked against you. Now, to really understand the guy who built this incredible fortune, we're actually going to jump forward in time. So picture this. It's a warm November day, and a 75-year-old Charlie Munger is driving his own Lexus through Pasadena. He's going back to the very same condominium projects where he first hit it big. This is the place that basically holds the blueprint for everything that came next. But hang on, before we hit the rewind button, let's just stick with the 75-year-old Munger for a second. Because a simple trip out for a sandwich, well, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about his unbelievably focused and kind of weird analytical mind. Okay, what's so telling about this scene is all the little details, right? First off, he insists on driving himself, even though he's blind in one eye. Apparently, he'd figured out tricks to deal with traffic. He drives by his old projects, and he's genuinely happy to see the lawns are still neat, pointing out these olive trees that he bought for less than $100 that are now huge and thriving. And after all that, where does this billionaire go for lunch? A Baker Square coffee shop, in a strip mall. So the meal's over, and Munger gets up to pay. His waiter, a young, super enthusiastic guy named Gabriel, runs over to help him out. Munger seems a little confused and asks, "Are you our waiter?" Gabriel says yeah, and Munger just shoves 2 $10 bills at him for a check that was maybe $15, says keep the change, and walks out. I mean, it's a nice tip, but the whole thing is just
weirdly detached. And here it is, the explanation, straight from the man himself. He flat out admits that he doesn't really look at people's faces because his mind is just always somewhere else. It's constantly churning through problems and ideas and numbers. See, it's not him being rude. It's just this relentless, all-consuming internal focus. And this quote from the guy who would become his real estate partner, Otis Booth, just nails it. This crazy intense concentration wasn't just some personality quirk, it was his superpower. It was the one thing that let him see opportunities that everyone else missed, and it's how he built a fortune literally from the ground up. So let's see how he first put that superpower to work. All right, so now let's hit that rewind button, all the way back to the 1960s. Munger's a lawyer, okay? He's not a developer. But the world around him is changing fast, and that superpower of his, it let him see the signal in all the noise.
You have to understand what was happening at the time. Southern California was absolutely exploding. 1,000 people a week were moving to LA. Land was cheap and everywhere. Demand was through the roof. And Munger was watching regular people become fabulously wealthy in real estate. So here he is, practicing law, but he's watching a gold rush happen right in front of him. And the crazy part is how it all kicked off. It was basically an accident. His client and friend Otis Booth has this piece of land near Caltech that has to be sold. But Munger's legal advice is, unconventional. He says, don't sell it, develop it yourself. Booth is intrigued, so he throws down a challenge. Hey, if this is such a great idea, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and join me? Munger, kind of feeling trapped by his own advice, agrees. And just like that, a lawyer becomes a real estate developer. So here they are, Munger and Booth, total rookies in this game. They have no idea what they're doing. But Munger, he starts applying the same analytical brain he used in law to this totally new physical world of construction. So how did that first project go? The one he was kind of dared into doing? Well, they put in $100,000 and they got back $500,000, a 400% profit on their first try. This wasn't just a home run. It was a grand slam. It proved Munger's gut instinct was dead on.
But honestly, the money isn't even the most important part. The real takeaway here, the thing that shows you exactly how Munger's brain works, is this. He's paying attention. He notices that in their first project, all the ground floor units sold like hotcakes, while the upstairs apartments, they just sat there. So for their next project, they adapted. They built only single-story condos. Now, this meant they couldn't build as many units, and they had to charge more for them, but it didn't matter. They sold out, instantly. He wasn't just building, he was learning from the market in real time.
So after 2 winning projects with Booth, Munger lines up a third one, an even bigger development. But this one had a huge catch, a problem so big it actually made his partner quit.
All right, put yourself in his shoes for a second. You've got a winning formula, you're making serious cash with a partner you trust, and then a new deal pops up. But your partner looks at it and says, nope, too risky, I'm out. What do? That was the exact test Munger was facing with this project in a town called Alhambra. Okay, so here's the snag. The land was on a 49-year lease from the city. Now, for any banker back then, that's a huge red flag. Standard practice was that you needed a lease of at least 50 years. For Otis Booth, this was a deal breaker. End of story. But Munger, he saw something else. He looked past the rule book and saw the psychology. He knew a local savings and loan was sitting on a mountain of cash and was desperate to make loans. He bet that their need to lend money would be stronger than their need to follow convention. This is a classic early Munger move, understanding the incentives of the other guy. And guess what? His bet paid off big time. The lender basically begged him to take the money. He also put together a team, hiring a really sharp but unemployed architect named Al Marshall to handle sales. And the funny thing is, the land they were building on, it was an old sewage treatment plant. Marshall even joked they should name the place Rancho Sewage. And through it all, Munger stuck to his core belief he developed. You never, ever skimp on landscaping. He was convinced that spending big money on big, mature trees was one of the best investments you could make. It created value people could see and feel, and he said you'd get it back triple.
So the Alhambra project, along with a couple others, was a massive success. Munger had totally cracked the code on a new industry, he'd made a fortune, and built a reputation. And then, he did something nobody saw coming. By the time the dust settled on his 5 real estate projects, Charlie Munger had personally made $1.4 million. Now, back in the 1960s, that was an absolutely life-changing amount of money. More than enough to set him up for life and give him the capital he'd need for all his future investments.
And with that $1.4 million in the bank, right at the absolute peak of his success in real estate, he just walked away. He quit the business entirely.
So why on earth would you do that? Well, it all comes down to this idea he would make famous later on, the circle of competence. Munger just made a cold, hard, rational decision. He realized development demanded two things he absolutely hated. One, constantly being in debt, and two, managing a million tiny, critical details. He knew it was way too complicated to do part-time while also trying to be a lawyer. See, it wasn't about what he could do, it was about knowing where his unique talents could be used best. It was an incredible act of self-awareness.
And even though his time as a developer was really short, that experience, it left a permanent mark on him. It woke something up inside him that would influence his decisions and his charity for the rest of his life. This quote, it tells you everything. Munger found out that he had the soul of an architect. He actually loved creating something real, something tangible and useful that would last. He didn't want his legacy to just be about stock prices and financial reports. He wanted to build things. And that desire started right here with these first condo projects.
And that kind of brings us to a final thought. Munger never planned on being a real estate guy. He got shamed into it, remember? But this accidental career gave him the money and, way more importantly, it taught him these critical lessons about psychology, about watching the market, and about knowing yourself. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What experiences in our own lives are actually building the foundation for our future success, even if we can't see it right now?
You know, some partnerships are just about business, but others really do change the world. Today, we are diving deep into one of the all-time greatest intellectual pairings in modern history, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. And this isn't just a story about investing, not at all. It's really a story about friendship, about how two completely different kinds of genius can complement each other, and how one powerful mind can literally expand the horizons of another. So let's get into how this whole thing started. Warren Buffett himself had this incredible way of putting it. I can see, he can hear. That just perfectly captures the whole dynamic of their partnership, doesn't it? It's about two distinct, powerful talents coming together to create something way, way bigger than the sum of its parts. You have one mind that sees the big picture, the opportunity, and the other that hears the subtle risks, the underlying truths that most people miss. This idea, it's the foundation for everything that came next. So where does a story of this magnitude even begin? You might think it starts in a boardroom or on Wall Street, but nope, it starts in Omaha, Nebraska. And the story begins with family, a very beloved dog, and sadly, a tragic event that would unexpectedly set the stage for history to be made.
To really get Charlie, you kind of have to start with his dad, Al Munger. Now, Al had this amazing companion, a big wine-colored dog named Bob. And Al used to lovingly call Bob his college-educated dog, claiming he had an advanced degree in retrieving ducks. And get this, if Bob ever missed a bird, Al would gently scold him, saying, "To think a college-educated dog like you would miss a duck." It's just a charming little story, but it paints a picture of the kind of warm, character-filled home Charlie grew up in.
But then, in 1959, tragedy struck. Al Munger passed away, and it left this huge void in the family. Charlie, who was living out in California at the time, he came back home to Omaha to take care of his father's estate. And it was during this really difficult period that some friends, who saw a certain kind of brilliance in Charlie, arranged for him to meet a very promising young investor who was already making a name for himself in Omaha, a guy named Warren Buffett.
And wow, the connection? It was immediate. As Munger put it later, how could he not take to a guy who, just like him, preferred reading and thinking to pretty much anything else? He saw a kindred spirit in Buffett, someone who learned something from absolutely everything he ever read. Right from that very first meeting, an unbreakable bond of friendship and, just as important, intellectual respect was forged.
So that first meeting, it wasn't just a one and done. No, that was the spark. It was the spark that ignited one of the most productive, long-lasting partnerships in the history of business. And it grew through constant communication, through shared meals, and through this ever-deepening intellectual collaboration.
Right away, Buffett saw the raw horsepower in Munger's brain. Now, at the time, Munger had a very successful law practice, but Buffett saw that as a total waste of his talent. He famously told Charlie that law was fine as a hobby, but his real calling was somewhere else.
He was relentless, constantly pushing Munger to leave the legal world behind and become a full-time professional investor.
And this story, it just perfectly shows you the personal side of their growing friendship, and it makes these two giants feel a little more human. So not long after they met, Warren goes to visit the Mungers in California. Charlie's wife, Nancy, makes this lovely steak dinner with 3 different vegetables. Well, Warren, being Warren, eats the steak but doesn't touch a single vegetable. Not one. He was, however, pretty happy about the ice cream for dessert. And the Munger kids were just totally fascinated by this grown-up who drank an unbelievable amount of Pepsi. It's a small thing, but it shows you the personal, family-level connection they were building.
This quote from Charlie's daughter Molly just captures it perfectly. She might not remember the exact day Warren entered their lives, but she vividly remembers the symptoms. All of a sudden, her dad was on the phone, constantly, sometimes for hours at a time, just locked in these intense conversations with his new friend back in Omaha, tearing apart business deals and bouncing ideas off each other.
Now, it's important to get this. They weren't formal business partners right away. They each had their own thing going on. But as Buffett says, their intellectual partnership started almost immediately. It was a collaboration built not on contracts or legal documents, but on a foundation of absolute trust and just this profound respect for how the other guy's mind worked.
So every great partnership has its own unique dynamic, right? And for them, Munger, who was a natural leader in his own right, had to figure out what his role was going to be alongside this singular force of nature that is Warren Buffett. And what emerged was a dynamic that leveraged both of their strengths just perfectly.
This quote, this really tells you everything you need to know about Charlie Munger's wisdom and his pragmatism. He got that a partnership isn't always about being 50-50 equals. He recognized Buffett's unique genius and had the self-awareness and the lack of ego to step into a supportive number 2 role. He knew you had to learn to be a follower before you could be a leader. And in Warren, he saw someone who was absolutely worth following.
And on the flip side, this is exactly why Buffett valued him so much. This wasn't just a friendship. For Buffett, it was a strategic weapon. He describes Munger's mind as this finely tuned instrument that could spot the fatal flaw in any investment idea in less than a minute. I mean, think about that. For an investor like Buffett, who has to make huge decisions with confidence, having a partner like that is just invaluable.
And this incredible skill is what earned Munger that legendary nickname from Buffett, the abominable no man. Now, it might sound negative, but it was the highest possible compliment. Buffett would get all excited about an idea, but he always used Charlie as the final, most rigorous test. If an idea could survive the intense scrutiny of Charlie Munger, and even he couldn't find a reason to say no, well, then they knew they were really onto something big.
But Munger was way more than just a safety net. His biggest, most profound contribution was something else entirely. It was challenging the very foundation of Warren Buffett's investment philosophy, a philosophy that Buffett had learned from his hero and mentor, the legendary Ben Graham.
So let's back up. Buffett came up as a die-hard disciple of Ben Graham, and Graham's approach was, in its own way, brilliant. He taught Buffett to hunt for what he called cigar butts. These are mediocre businesses that are trading at such ridiculously cheap prices that you could, metaphorically, pick one up off the street, get one last free puff out of it, and then toss it. It was all about buying bargains without much regard for the quality of the business itself.
But Munger, he saw a huge flaw in this. He respected Graham, of course, but he thought the approach was incomplete. As Munger put it so bluntly, Graham had blind spots. He completely failed to appreciate that some truly wonderful businesses were so good, so profitable, that they were actually worth paying a higher, seemingly non-bargain price for.
And this really sets up the central intellectual clash of their partnership. On one side, you've got Graham's ironclad rule: buy mediocre businesses at wonderful prices, price is everything. And on the other side, you have Munger's powerful counterargument: no, that's wrong. You buy wonderful businesses at fair prices. Forget the cigar butts. You focus on quality for the long haul. The real game, Munger argued, is to get more quality than you pay for in price.
Now look, this big shift, it didn't just happen overnight. It was a process. It really began the moment they met in '59. A key moment came in 1968 at a conference in Coronado where Munger openly critiqued Graham's ideas right in front of Buffett's peers. And the philosophy finally clicked into place in 1972 with the purchase of See's Candies. They paid 3 times its book value, an amount that would have made the old Ben Graham just shudder, but it was a wonderful business. And that deal marked the official start of Berkshire's good business era.
So what we're really seeing here is the creation of something totally new. It wasn't about Munger being right and Graham being wrong. Not at all. It was about combining the very best of both worlds, taking Graham's discipline about price
and merging it with Munger's intense focus on quality. And that combination forged the modern investment philosophy that made Berkshire Hathaway a legend.
And Buffett is just incredibly open about Munger's role in all of this. He freely admits that Graham's view, while it was his foundation, was also limiting. And he says it took a force as powerful as Charlie Munger's intellect to push him beyond it. See, Munger didn't just give him a few new ideas. He fundamentally expanded Buffett's horizons and changed the entire way he saw the world of investing.
And here it is, the synthesis, the grand combination of ideas, right from Buffett's own mouth. This became the new formula that would guide Berkshire's capital for decades. He didn't abandon Graham completely, he just integrated Munger's wisdom. The goal was no longer just about buying cheap things, it was about buying wonderful businesses at a price that made sense.
And really, no quote nails it better than this one. It's a testament to a lifetime of partnership and the literal billions of dollars in value created because of Munger's influence. With his classic candor, Buffett just lays it out there. Without Charlie pushing him to evolve, his own success would have been a tiny fraction of what it became.
So this whole story leaves us with a really powerful question to think about, doesn't it? The Munger-Buffett partnership teaches us that the right partner isn't someone who just agrees with you all the time. The right partner is someone who challenges you, who sees your blind spots, and who possesses a power of mind that can expand your own horizons. So it's worth asking yourself, who plays that role for you?
Imagine building a law firm so good, so incredibly successful that you can afford to quit being a lawyer just a few years after starting it. Sounds pretty wild, right? Well, that's exactly what Charlie Munger did. Today, we're diving into the story of that firm, Munger, Tullis & Olsey. Pound for pound, the best law firm. Now, that is a heck of a claim for a founder to make, but you know what? Munger, Tullis & Olson wasn't your typical stuffy law firm. Not even close. It was this incredible experiment in pure meritocracy, a place built on brainpower and, get this, radical transparency. And the mastermind behind it all was, of course, the one and only Charlie Munger. You gotta love this quote from Warren Buffett. It kind of perfectly sums up how a lot of us feel about the legal world, right? It's just a crowded, stuffy, often conventional place. And that's exactly the world that Charlie Munger and a handful of his colleagues decided to rebel against. They wanted to build something completely different. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the Munger family's deep roots in law. Then, we'll get into the super lawyer rebellion that started it all. After that, a peek inside their unique meritocracy, the huge impact of Berkshire Hathaway, and finally, Munger's lasting influence on the whole operation. Okay, let's start at the beginning, family. Because you really can't understand this firm without understanding where Charlie Munger came from. For him, law wasn't just a career path. It was quite literally the family business. I mean, just look at this. It's wild. The law was just in the Munger DNA. We're talking a full-blown legal dynasty. His dad was a lawyer, his grandpa was a lawyer, and then look at his own kids. 4 of them attorneys, 5 of them married to attorneys. It's almost like you couldn't show up to Thanksgiving dinner without a law degree. His daughter even said that becoming a lawyer was just a way to understand the family. That tells you everything, doesn't it? Now, Charlie Munger was not a warm and fuzzy guy. Not at all. His daughter Molly said for her birthday she'd get cash, maybe a gift certificate. The thought of him actually going shopping, forget about it. So you can imagine how shocked she was when this package shows up while she's in her first year of law school. She opens it, and inside is this framed set of photos. Her great-grandfather, her grandfather, her dad, and her. It was this quiet, incredibly powerful nod of approval. Like, welcome to the club. You're one of us now. So you take that deep family history, that almost religious respect for the law, and you mix it with Munger's fiercely independent, almost rebellious spirit. And what do you get? Well, you get the perfect recipe for a revolution. It led to a new kind of law firm, one born out of pure frustration with the old way of doing things. Okay, so let's zoom in on 1962. This was a massive year. While his buddy Warren Buffett is over here starting to buy up this little textile company called Berkshire Hathaway, what's Munger doing? Oh, not much, just launching a law firm and an investment firm. At the same time, he is literally building the foundations for 2 legendary careers right in parallel. It's just incredible. So why leave? Why blow everything up? Well, they'd been at their old firm, Music, Peeler & Garrett, for a while, but then this new partner came on board. Munger called him a control freak, and he was basically crushing all the young, ambitious talent. So they walked. And their vision for the new place? It was the polar opposite. No more control freaks. They wanted a real democracy, a place where they'd only hire the absolute best of the best and let them run. And the guy driving this whole thing, the intellectual powerhouse, was Munger.
His co-founder, Rod Hills, put it perfectly here. He said Charlie just wouldn't accept anything on face value. He had this intense, almost obsessive interest in everything that gave him a totally different perspective. And that mindset, that became the DNA of the entire firm. It's what made them so different and so successful. All right, so let's pop the hood and see what made this place, MTO for short, really tick. It wasn't just about hiring smart people. It was about the culture they built from the ground up. And man, was it radical. It was a full-on experiment in creating a true no BS meritocracy. Getting a job at MTO was, and still is, like running a gauntlet. You couldn't just network your way in. Forget it. All they cared about were your grades. Your whole academic life, right back to your college days, was put under a microscope. And the result? Just an insane concentration of brainpower. I mean, get this. Out of about 130 lawyers, 17 of them were former Supreme Court clerks. That is just off the charts. We're talking more legal horsepower in one small firm than some entire universities have. The standard wasn't just high, it was absolute. And when I say absolute, I mean absolute. No exceptions. Not even for Charlie Munger's own daughter. Seriously, his daughter Molly applied for a job there and they turned her down flat. Why? Because she didn't make the Harvard Law Review. To them, it didn't matter whose daughter she was. The standard was the standard. End of story. Okay, but this might be the wildest part of all. Their pay system. Forget the usual corporate ladder stuff. At MTO, every year, every single partner gets a ballot. And on that ballot, they have to literally divide up all the firm's profits among all the other partners. No rules, no seniority, just what you think everyone is worth. It created the system of total, radical transparency where everyone's value, as judged by their peers, was laid bare for everyone else to see. So you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds brutal, a total bloodbath, right? But here's the crazy thing, it wasn't. As this partner, John Frank, points out, it actually made things more civil. Think about it, it's a zero-sum game. The more you give to one person, the less there is for everyone else. It forces you to be collaborative, to respect each other, because the people you tick off are the same people who decide your paycheck. It's a genius way to align everyone's interests. Now, a firm this different is going to attract some pretty special clients. And you can't get much more special or more important than Charlie Munger's other baby, Berkshire Hathaway. Sure, Berkshire Hathaway meant a steady stream of work. That was great, but the real value was something you just can't put a price on. It was the ultimate stamp of approval. When you're the go-to law firm for Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, that says everything. It's like the best marketing campaign in the world, and it costs you nothing. And this quote just nails it. Other top executives would literally say, hey, if they're good enough for Warren Buffett, they're good enough for me. It's such a simple, powerful idea. You've got the smartest guys in the room trusting this firm, so why wouldn't you? That one connection opened up a floodgate of new, high-profile clients. And man, did that phone ring. Look at this list of clients. This isn't just standard corporate law. We're talking about representing the entire Philippine government to chase down money stolen by Ferdinand Marcos. We're talking about being in the middle of the massive legal fallout from the Exxon Valdez oil spill. These are huge, history-making cases, and this little firm from California was right in the thick of it all. Which brings us to the big, looming question in all of this. The central paradox. Why on earth did Charlie Munger, the guy who dreamed this all up, walk away? Why did he quit being a lawyer just a few years after starting this amazing firm? Well, Charlie's take on being a lawyer was, let's say, unsentimental. Brutally honest, really. He basically said, your reward for solving one impossible problem for one difficult client is you get to do it all over again for another one. He saw it as a treadmill, and for a guy like him, that just wasn't going to cut it. And this right here is the real reason. He said it himself. I preferred making decisions and gambling my own money. He didn't want to be the advisor on the sidelines. He wanted to be the player on the field with his own skin in the game. For him, law was serving others. But investing was the path to real freedom, the independence that comes from building your own wealth, not just billing your time to someone else. But here's the thing. Quitting isn't really the right word. Yeah, he stopped practicing law back in 1965, but he never really left. He just changed hats. He became the firm's biggest client. He literally kept an office there. He was still showing up to retreats and holiday parties, still mentoring the younger lawyers. He went from being the founder to being the firm's North Star, its guiding spirit. So it all leaves you with this one kind of profound thought. Charlie Munger built a firm that was so incredibly good, he could afford to just quit it. It was so strong that it thrived without him, which gave him the freedom to go do everything else he wanted to do. So maybe that's the real secret to success, right? Building something that's so great, it doesn't even need you anymore.
You know, before Charlie Munger became this legendary figure, Warren Buffett's right-hand man at Berkshire Hathaway, he actually ran his own little investment shop. And for 14 years, this little-known partnership, man, it was a crucible. It was the thing that forged the principles and honestly the psychological toughness of the legend we know today.
I mean, come on, a little communism is good for the military. That is not something you expect to hear from a titan of capitalism, especially on the golf course, right? But that was pure Charlie Munger. And to really get the investor, you first have to understand the man. He was brilliant, totally unconventional. And yeah, he loved to be provocative. He wasn't your typical Wall Street suit, not even close. He was something else entirely.
All right, Section 1, the absent-minded professor. Who was Charlie Munger? See, long before he was juggling millions of dollars, Munger was already known for being, well, a bit eccentric. His mind just operated on a completely different plane. He would get so lost in his own world of thoughts that, to everyone else, he seemed completely detached from his surroundings.
This intensity, I mean, it could be just baffling to people around him. Just imagine this. You play a great game of golf with Munger, you're having a good time, and then the very next day, you see him in an elevator and he just stares right through you. When a partner asked him, "Hey, why didn't you say hello?" Munger just replied, "What guy?" He had no idea. Or at the office, he called 3 different secretaries, one after the other, the same name, Vivian. And at home, he could be sitting in his chair, deep into a business deal, while his kids were literally climbing all over him. It wasn't malice, not at all. It was just this state of intense, unwavering focus.
So that brings us to our next part, the utility room startup, the birth of a partnership. Okay, so by 1962, Munger is 38 years old. He's already a successful lawyer, he's doing great in real estate. But his friend from Omaha, this young guy named Warren Buffett, kept insisting that investing was his true calling. Munger finally took the leap, and with his poker buddy Jock Wheeler, he formed Wheeler, Munger & Company.
And this right here was one of Munger's core beliefs. He was so skeptical of those flashy corporate headquarters, he believed that real value was in the substance of a company, not its appearances. And as you're about to see, he took this idea to an almost comical extreme.
Yeah, the headquarters for Wheeler Munger was, well, it was definitely not opulent. We're talking about a tiny, pipe-riddled mezzanine office at the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange. It was right next to the toilet with 2 little windows looking out onto a grubby, dirty alley. And the rent? Just $150 a month, utilities included. Now you gotta remember, Munger's net worth at the time was around $300,000. So for him, this wasn't about saving money out of necessity. It was a physical statement, an embodiment of his discipline and focus.
Next up, deals, dice, and trust, building a circle of conviction. So Munger's new life really revolved around the stock exchange. His daily ritual started early. First, he checked the board, and then he'd roll dice with his friends to see who paid for breakfast at the stock exchange club. It was in this world that he built this really tight-knit circle of partners, guys like Rick Guerin, who were just drawn to his intellect and, maybe most importantly, his incredible integrity.
In the K&W Products deal, wow, it's just a masterclass in Munger's thinking. So he and Rick Guerin, they spot an estate sale in the newspaper for a company that makes stop-leak fluid for car radiators. Sounds boring, but the situation was messy. The guy who owned it had died, and he'd borrowed $160,000 from his wife's 2 elderly aunts and hadn't paid them in years. Now, any other investor might have seen that as an opportunity to swoop in and buy those notes for pennies on the dollar, right? Take advantage of the situation, but not Munger. He insisted on paying the aunts the full amount they were owed. He said he was unwilling to benefit from their distress. And that single ethical move, that gave him all the leverage they needed to trade those notes for control of the entire company.
It gets even better. Years later, Guerin needed to cash out of his half of that K&W investment. So he does the math and tells Munger he thinks his stake is worth about $200,000. Munger immediately replies, "No, you're wrong about that. It's worth $300,000. And he writes him a check right there on the spot. Guerin later said he would have been the happiest man on earth with $200,000. You see, for Munger, this wasn't just business. It was about being relentlessly fair and rational, even if it cost him money in the short term.
All right, time for the storm. The 1973-74 nightmare, a trial by fire. So for years, the partnership had just stunning performance. But then came the market crash of 73-74.
And this wasn't just some little downturn. This was a brutal, prolonged nightmare that would test Munger's philosophy, his relationships, and his psychological fortitude to the absolute breaking point.
And the numbers? They were just devastating. Munger's concentrated portfolio, the very strategy that had produced all those incredible gains, was now causing breathtaking losses. In 1973, the Dow fell 13%. Wheeler, Munger, it fell nearly 32%. The next year was just as bad, another 31.5% loss. We're talking 2 straight years of catastrophic declines.
Just think about what this meant for the people who had trusted him. We're talking about his friends, his family, his former law partners. For every $1,000 they put in at the start of 1973, they had just $467 left 2 years later. On paper, more than half their capital was just gone.
And this, right here, this was the source of Munger's agony. He had to report these terrible market prices, but he was absolutely certain the underlying value of his holdings was far, far higher. Take their stock in Blue Chip Stamps, a trading stamp company. It had cratered to $5.25 a share, but he believed its real worth was well above its old price of over $15. Their shares in the New America Fund were trading at $3.75, but the actual liquidating value per share was $9.28. He was literally watching the market call his diamonds garbage, and there was nothing he could do to stop it.
Munger had lost his own money before. It never really bothered him. He saw it as just part of the game. But this was different. The pain came from this immense burden of responsibility he felt for his partners. He'd even failed a persuasion test, as he called it, with one partner who panicked and sold everything right at the bottom, losing a fortune. And that failure just haunted him. This experience taught him that managing other people's money in this way was, psychologically unbearable for him.
Okay, so let's get to the good part, the forging of the legend, the rebound and the reward. But for the 95% of his partners who held on, the ones who trusted Munger's conviction through those darkest days, the reward was about to be spectacular. The crash didn't break Munger. It hardened his philosophy. It set the stage for the next even greater chapter of his life, Berkshire Hathaway.
And what a rebound it was. In 1975, the market finally turned, and Munger's deeply undervalued holdings just exploded. The partnership posted a staggering gain of 73.2% in a single year. The storm had passed, and that conviction had paid off. He'd recovered all the losses and then some, which allowed him to liquidate the partnership on a really high note.
So let's just look at how powerful that conviction really was. Remember Blue Chip Stamps? That company that was one of the main causes of all those paper losses?
Well, at the absolute bottom of the market, at the moment of maximum pessimism, a single share of that stock was worth just $5.25. Now, the investors who stayed the course, they eventually saw their Blue Chip Stamp stock converted into shares of this new company Munger and Buffett were building. You might have heard of it, Berkshire Hathaway. So what was that $5.25 share worth 26 years later?
About $3,700. That is a compounded annual return of 28.5% for over a quarter of a century. It's just a staggering testament to the power of buying quality assets when everyone else hates them and having the stomach to hold on through the pain.
So Munger shut down his partnership, but not because it failed, far from it. He shut it down because its success came at too high a psychological price. He learned that he never again wanted to be in the position of reporting temporary market prices to partners who might panic. But the wisdom and the capital that came from those 14 years, forged in the fire of that crash, became a cornerstone of the entire Berkshire Hathaway empire.
You see, Munger's trial by fire in 1974, it didn't just make him money. It defined his entire investment philosophy, and really his character. It proved that true value isn't found in a stock ticker. It's found in deep knowledge and unwavering conviction. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? We all face our own trials, our own crucibles. What are the moments of conviction that are going to end up defining us?
Today, we're going to dive into one of the greatest and honestly most untold stories in modern business. It's about how a company in a totally dying industry, they sold promotional stickers, became the secret launchpad for Berkshire Hathaway, which is, one of the most successful conglomerates in the history of the world. So let's get into it.
It really is a paradox when you think about it. The main business of Blue Chip Stamps was, let's be honest, doomed. It was heading for the history books. And yet, it somehow generated billions of dollars in wealth. Now, this was no accident. It was the result of a financial insight so powerful, so profound, that it could turn a failing company into an absolute money-printing machine. The real question is, how on earth did they do it?
And this story, it really kicks off with one person, Charlie Munger.
See, while everybody else was looking at these little stamps and seeing his simple retail gimmick, Munger saw something completely different. He actually went to his son, who was a physics student at the time, with this incredibly complex math problem. He wanted to figure out exactly how fast the giant pool of money inside blue chip stamps would shrink under different scenarios. He'd found a hidden financial engine, and he wanted to understand its physics.
All right, so to understand this whole empire, you first have to wrap your head around the genius insight that was at its very core. It's a concept that Munger, his partner Rick Guerin, and a pretty young investor at the time named Warren Buffett immediately saw for what it was, a golden opportunity. So first things first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what blue chip stamps even did. The best way to think about it is like a loyalty program from the 50s and 60s. You'd go to the grocery store, maybe the gas station, and for every dollar you spent, they'd give you a few of these little stamps. You'd go home, you'd paste them into these little books, and once you filled them up, you could trade them in for prizes, like toasters or watches. Pretty simple, right? But here is the secret sauce. The business wasn't really about the stamps, and it sure wasn't about the toasters. It was all about something called float. You see, the retailers, they had to pay blue chip for the stamps in cash, and they had to do it up front. But the shoppers, they took months, sometimes even years, to collect enough stamps to cash them in. And a whole bunch of them never did. Well, that created this massive, and I mean massive, pool of cash that blue chip was just sitting on. It was, for all intents and purposes, a giant interest-free loan from its customers.
So the crucial point is that this machine, it worked beautifully. Step 1, retailers hand over the cash. Step 2, that cash builds up into this giant investment fund. That's the float. And step 3, because people were so slow and predictable about redeeming their stamps, Munger and Buffett could take that float, all that cash, and invest it in stocks, in other businesses. They were making money on someone else's money long before they ever had to think about giving it back.
And look, we are not talking about a little bit of cash here. By the early 1970s, the float at Blue Chip was closing in on $100 million. I mean, in today's money, that is an enormous war chest. Munger, Buffett, and Guerin saw this pile of investable cash, and they just knew if they could get control of the company, they could do absolutely incredible things with it. The only question was, how?
Now, their path to controlling all that float wasn't some kind of hostile raid. It was actually the opposite. An unexpected legal battle created the perfect opening for a quiet, almost friendly takeover.
You see, Blue Chip was originally started as this exclusive club by 9 really big retailers. This gave them a huge advantage, but it also got them in trouble with the Department of Justice, which ended up suing them for antitrust violations. The result was this court order in 1967 that forced the company to totally reorganize. And this is the most important part. It forced them to issue shares to thousands of smaller retailers who used their stamps but weren't owners.
And as Buffett himself explains it, this court order just suddenly created a public market for blue chip stock. And the new owners, guys who own gas stations and corner stores, they had absolutely no idea about the value of the float. To them, it was just a small stock certificate. But to Munger, Buffett, and Guerin, they saw a claim on a $100 million pile of cash. So they started buying, share by share, quietly until they controlled the whole company.
And once they had control of that board, they did not waste a single second. They immediately got to work, transforming this kind of sleepy stamp company into a powerful and, frankly, very unconventional money machine.
They were completely, brutally honest about the situation. They knew the whole trading stamp craze was fading out. But you know what? It didn't matter. Not one bit. For them, the stamp business was just the mechanism for generating the float. The real business, the one they were actually building, was an investment company, and it was funded by that float.
And right here, you can literally see the foundations of Berkshire Hathaway being laid piece by piece. They took that cash that Blue Chip was generating, and they bought See's Candies, they bought Wesco Financial, they bought the Buffalo Evening News. Every single one of these companies was a cash-generating machine on its own, and they were all bought and paid for using the float from that dying little stamp business.
But, their cleverness and their aggressive moves, well, they eventually attracted some attention they really didn't want. The acquisition of Wesco Financial in particular was so strange, so unusual, that it actually triggered a full-blown investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
Okay, so here was the situation. Blue Chip already owned a little piece of Wesco Financial. Wesco's management then announces this merger where they'd swap their shares for shares in a different company. But Munger and Buffett, they looked at the terms of the deal and they just couldn't believe their eyes. They thought Wesco was basically giving itself away, selling itself way too cheap, swapping really valuable assets for what they saw as overvalued paper. They just felt like they had to step in.
So to block this deal, they had to convince the Peters family, who owned a huge block of Wesco stock. Buffett flies out to meet the family heiress, a woman named Elizabeth Peters, at the San Francisco airport. And she was skeptical, as you can imagine. She asked him this just legendary question. She says, "Okay, Mr. Buffett, what happens if you get hit by a truck? What happens if you, the genius, are gone?" Buffett's answer was simple, and it was perfect. Charlie Munger was waiting in the wings. He convinced her, and together they blocked the merger.
And this is where the story takes a really dramatic turn. After they killed that merger, Munger and Buffett did something, well, something odd. In what Munger himself called a quixotic moment, they decided to offer $17 a share for more Wesco stock, even though they knew for a fact the price was going to fall now that the merger was off. They just felt it was the right thing to do. But to the SEC, this looked incredibly suspicious. I mean, why would anyone intentionally overpay for stock? They immediately suspected some kind of market manipulation and launched a formal investigation.
Now, what could have been an absolute disaster turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The pressure from the SEC actually forced them to make a move that was not only brilliant, but it's what forged the very structure of the modern Berkshire Hathaway we know today.
The SEC's main problem was that their corporate structure was, to put it mildly, an absolute mess. It had just sort of grown organically over years of deal-making, and it resulted in this tangled web of crisscrossing ownership between all these different entities. Munger even admitted it looked suspicious. He said, because so many people create complications to hide fraud, the SEC delved and delved. They weren't hiding anything, but they couldn't easily explain it either.
So their solution, instead of fighting with regulators for years and years, was just radical simplification. They decided to merge blue-chip stamps, diversified retailing, and all their other little entities into one single, clean, totally understandable company, Berkshire Hathaway. The SEC investigation, by accident, forced them to create the titan we all know today.
So as we wrap this up, let's just take a moment and look back at the really profound legacy of this little stamp company and the powerful, powerful lesson at the very heart of its story.
Well, just as they predicted, the original business didn't just decline, it almost completely evaporated. Munger himself joked about it later. He said, "I presided over a reduction in trading stamp sales from over $120 million down to less than $100,000. So I presided over a failure of 99.99%.
But, and this is the whole punchline, here's that paradox in full view. While the stamp business was completely collapsing, the net worth of the company absolutely soared, from $46 million to $169 million in less than a decade. And this reveals their true genius. The business was never, ever about the product. It was about the capital. The stamps were just the temporary vehicle they used to accumulate the fuel that would build an empire.
And in the end, it all comes back to this one philosophy from Munger himself. It's about having this peculiar mindset. It's about having the patience to wait and wait and wait for that perfect, weird opportunity to come along like a dying stamp company with a mountain of cash hidden inside it, and then having the extreme decisiveness to bet big when it does. It's just a powerful lesson in seeing value where absolutely no one else does, and it's a perfect testament to a truly peculiar and truly brilliant mind.
You know, sometimes the biggest, most important lessons in life don't come from a university or some thick textbook. They come from the most unexpected places, like, say, a simple box of chocolates. Today, we are diving deep into the story of how a beloved little candy company completely changed the way we think about investing.
Okay, let's just start right here. Just let this sink in. This one quote from Warren Buffett tells you everything. We're not just talking about some good deal they made. We're talking about the one investment that paved the way for a $12 billion win with Coca-Cola. This is the story of the deal that taught two of the smartest guys in the room how to be even smarter. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the lesson itself, then dig into what made C so special in the first place. We'll walk through the high-stakes deal, see how they had to fight to protect it, and then get to the big one, the fundamental shift in thinking that it caused and the incredible legacy it left behind.
Yeah, so when Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett bought See's Candy, it wasn't just another name in their portfolio. It was basically their business school. The lessons they picked up here would literally form the bedrock of Berkshire Hathaway for decades. So let's set the scene. It's 1972. Buffett and Munger are using cash from their company blue chip stamps, and they're hunting for their next big thing. And See's Candy was a major leap for them. I mean, it was the biggest purchase they'd ever made. This was a move that was going to test everything they thought they knew and end up rewriting their own rule book. So, why See's? I mean, of all the businesses out there, why a candy company on the West Coast? To really get why they made this investment, you have to understand the culture at See's. It was this almost fanatical, obsessive commitment to quality that was just part of its DNA from day one.
And you can see how this identity was forged in fire, right? It was started back in 1921 by a 71-year-old woman, Mary C., using her own recipes. Think about that. Then, during the Great Depression, they cut prices, sure, but they never cut quality. And here's the kicker. During World War II, when sugar was rationed, what did they do? Instead of using cheap, crummy ingredients, they just made less candy. And people went nuts for it, lining up around the block because they knew they were getting the real deal. That cemented the reputation right there.
This motto, quality without compromise, this wasn't just some clever ad campaign. It was everything. It was the North Star for every single decision they made, from the nuts they bought to the people they hired. And because of that, they built this army of loyal customers who trusted the brand completely. And this is where it gets really good. I mean, get this. A candy factory with no pipes for water in the kitchen, only pipes for cream and whipping cream. I mean, who does that? That tells you everything. They had employees who were there for 30, 40, even 50 years. This wasn't a job, it was a craft. Munger had this great phrase for it. He called it a seamless web of deserved trust. Just a perfect way to put it.
All right, so you have this incredible company built on trust and quality. And that brings us to the deal itself. For two guys who made their name buying struggling companies for pennies on the dollar, paying up for a premium brand like See's, well, it went against every single rule they had.
You know, when the deal was first pitched to Buffett over the phone, this was his actual reaction. He was what they called a cigar butt investor. He'd look for a discarded, ugly business that had one last free puff left in it. So a high-end candy brand, it just didn't compute for him. The phone actually went dead right after he said this. But in the few minutes it took to get the call reconnected, everything, and I mean everything, changed. Buffett just glanced at the financials, and he saw a business that made fantastic money without needing to reinvest a lot of capital. The numbers told a story that his old philosophy just couldn't argue with. His mind was made up in literally minutes. The negotiation got pretty heated. The C family was firm on $30 million, but Buffett and Munger, they were still stuck in their old habits. They would not budge from $25 million. For a little while there, it really looked like the whole deal was going to fall apart over that $5 million difference. In the end, the C family called back. They took the $25 million. But here's the crucial detail. That price was 3 times the company's book value. For Buffett and Munger, that was absolutely unheard of. They had never, ever paid a premium like that. They were in completely uncharted territory. And this quote is just, wow, it's incredible to hear looking back. Munger flat out admits that if the family had asked for just a tiny bit more, they would have walked. They were that close to missing out on one of the most important deals of their lives, all because their old habits were so ingrained. It just goes to show you, even the greats are always learning. So the deal is done, but their real education was just getting started. Almost right away, they got hit with some serious challenges that forced them to really understand and defend the true value of the gem they had just bought. So first, the trouble came from the people who loved See's the most, the customers. When they heard that some faceless holding company called Blue Chip Stamps had bought their favorite candy store, they freaked out. We're talking complaints, hate mail. They were convinced the new owners would destroy the quality. And while that was going on, a big competitor saw a chance to move in. And this wasn't just competition. This was a full-on identity theft. Russell Stover created these Mrs. Stover's stores that were blatant copies. I mean, the same black and white checkerboard floors, the same layout, the same old-fashioned vibe. They were trying to confuse customers and just steal See's business. This is where Charlie Munger, the lawyer, just went into beast mode. His response was brilliant. It was systematic and completely overwhelming. He had the CEO photograph every single stolen detail. He put a top partner at his law firm on the case, and then he basically buried them in legal threats, showing them exactly what was coming. And guess what? It worked. Russell Stover tucked its tail and ran. So through all of this, through buying the business, dealing with angry customers, and fighting off a copycat competitor, a huge lesson was starting to sink in. This whole experience was about to trigger a seismic shift in their entire worldview on investing.
And this right here, this is the whole thing in a nutshell. The old way was the cigar butt approach. Find a cheap, ugly, discarded business and hope you can squeeze one last puff of profit out of it. The C's lesson was the complete opposite. It's so much better to buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. They finally understood that quality and brand are assets worth paying for. And Munger just says it perfectly here. C's was the proof. They broke their own rule, they paid a premium, and it worked like a charm. At the exact same time, one of their old cigar butt investments was failing miserably. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The lesson was crystal clear. Quality wins. And that brings us to the real legacy of this little candy company. Its impact on Berkshire Hathaway wasn't just the profit it made. It was the cash it generated and the wisdom it provided that allowed them to go on and build an absolute empire. Yeah, through C's, they found this whole new kind of company. Munger calls it a business that drowns in money. C's just gushed cash year after year after year. But it didn't really need that cash to grow. So that created this river of capital that Buffett and Munger could scoop up and pour into other amazing businesses, like Coca-Cola. It became a cornerstone of the whole Berkshire Hathaway model. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this question. Because the story of C's Candy, it's about more than just money. It's about how one single experience can come along and just completely shatter your old way of thinking, giving you a much better way to see the world. So think about it. What was your C's Candy moment? You know, it's funny how we put public figures into these neat little boxes, especially guys like Charlie Munger. We think, okay, conservative, capitalist, predictable. But what if one single, almost forgotten story could just completely shatter that whole image? Well, today, we're diving into a chapter of Munger's life that reveals a side of him that is, well, it's profound, and I guarantee it's completely unexpected. And this quote from his good friend Otis Booth, it really tells you something, doesn't it? Munger wasn't the kind of guy who picked fights. His enemies, they came from envy. He just didn't care about being popular. The man was driven by this incredibly powerful internal compass, and as we're about to find out, it led him down a path that would shock even the people who knew him best. So, that internal compass, where does it lead? Well, it leads us to this really jarring scene. I want you to picture this. It's Omaha, Nebraska, 1998. The annual Berkshire Hathaway meeting is in town. The setting is a classic old-school steakhouse, but what's happening outside is anything but ordinary. So you've got hundreds of Berkshire Hathaway fans, they're all excited to see their heroes, but they're met by this line of protesters. And the signs are graphic, accusing Buffett and Munger of being baby killers. I mean, can you imagine? For these two guys who were seen as these icons of conservative, Midwestern values, this was a completely shocking sight. It just didn't make any sense. So, fast forward to the next day, you're at the annual meeting, and of course, someone asks the question. A shareholder gets up and puts Warren Buffett right on the spot about his foundation giving money to pro-choice groups like Planned Parenthood. And Buffett, in that classic Buffett way, kind of folksy but super sharp, he starts off by talking about the company's charity plan, a total deflection. But then he drops an absolute bombshell. After confirming, his foundation gives money, he completely redirects the spotlight. He says Charlie gives to Planned Parenthood, put Charlie's name on the signs. And that's the big mystery here, right? Why was Charlie Munger, the guy everyone saw as a staunch Republican, the real engine behind this whole firestorm? I mean, just look at the contrast. On one side, you have the public image, a conservative Republican, a traditional family guy with 8 kids. And on the other side, the reality, a quiet, behind-the-scenes pioneer of the abortion rights movement. And this wasn't just a secret from the public. No. Warren Buffett himself said that 99% of Munger's own friends, most of them conservatives, had absolutely no idea. So you have to ask, right? How does a guy like this end up with such a deeply held, yet very private conviction? Well, to find the answer, we have to go inside his mind and meet his number one hero, Benjamin Franklin. Munger had this fascinating philosophy for learning. He believed you should make friends with the eminent dead. Basically, learn directly from the lives and the writings of the greatest minds in history. And for Charlie Munger, there was no closer intellectual friend than Ben Franklin. To Munger, Franklin was the whole package.
He wasn't just a great writer or a great thinker. He was the best at everything he did: investing, science, diplomacy. But the most important one for our story, Munger saw him as the greatest contributor to civic causes of his time. And that became Munger's personal blueprint for how to live a good life.
And right here, this is the core motivation. Munger wasn't interested in just getting rich for the sake of having a big pile of money. He saw wealth the way Franklin did, as a tool. It was the key to unlocking the freedom to make a real contribution to the world, to fix the problems that he saw needed fixing.
Okay, so he's got the philosophy, he's got the guiding principle, but what's the spark? What's the event that pushes him from just quietly believing something to taking direct revolutionary action? Well, it all started with a simple headline in the newspaper.
So Munger's reading the paper, and he comes across this story about a doctor, Leon Belaus, who was just convicted of a crime in California. And what was his crime? He simply referred a woman who needed an abortion to someone who could help her. For Munger, this was an absolute injustice. And just like that, he immediately got his own law firm to take on the doctor's appeal, pro bono. But let's be clear, this wasn't some easy black and white decision for him. He talked later about the deep internal conflict he felt. He had a reverence for human life that made the pro-choice position really emotionally difficult for him. This wasn't about politics. It was a deeply personal struggle.
And this is where that incredible Munger mind kicks in. He did what he always does. He analyzed the consequences. He thought through the societal impact of what he called mandatory motherhood. And through pure, cold logic, he came to the conclusion that a woman's right to choose was a necessary principle, even if it meant he had to overrule a part of his own emotional nature to get there.
So once Munger was on board, he didn't just write a check and walk away. Oh no. He became the general, the chief architect of this brilliant, multi-pronged campaign designed to win the Belaus case and change the law. His strategy was nothing short of methodical.
His plan was a masterclass. First, step 1, get the money. He went to his friend Warren Buffett and got him to fund the whole legal defense. Step 2, assemble the legal firepower. He put together a friend of the court brief, that's an argument from an outside party, and got 17 legal heavyweights to sign it. Step 3, get the medical authorities on board. And finally, step 4, provide direct practical help to women who needed it right then and there.
And that third step, you have to just stop and think about this. 178. Remember, this is before the internet, before email. Munger personally managed to get 178 medical school deans and professors from all over the country to sign on to his cause. This completely changed the game. It wasn't just a legal debate anymore. He had established an overwhelming medical consensus, which gave the whole thing incredible credibility.
But it's that fourth step that really shows you how far they were willing to go. While the whole court case was going on, Munger and Buffett secretly created and funded a church called the Ecumenical Fellowship. Now, this had nothing to do with religion. It was a front. Its real mission was to act as an underground railroad, counseling women and helping them find safe legal abortions, sometimes even flying them out of the country. These guys weren't just talking, they were taking action. So all of this, the money, the legal strategy, the medical experts, the secret underground railroad, it was all building toward one single moment: the verdict from the California Supreme Court. In September of 1969, the decision comes down. It's a victory. But look at that number, 4-3. It was won on a knife's edge. A single vote swinging the other way, one judge changing their mind, and the entire course of history would have been different. And the impact of that one vote was absolutely monumental. The Belaus decision was the first time any major court in the U.S. had struck down an anti-abortion law as unconstitutional. Then, just 2 years later, its legal reasoning was cited directly in the legal briefs for Roe v. Wade. Munger's quiet little fight in California had created what he called the first chink in the armor, and it directly paved the way for that landmark Supreme Court case. And for Munger, this wasn't just some one-and-done fight. He stayed with it for decades, serving as a trustee and even as the chief financial officer for Planned Parenthood of Los Angeles, continuing the work he started all those years ago with the Belaus case.
And maybe nothing illustrates his unwavering, and let's be honest, often startling conviction better than this story. He's at a party for a beloved obstetrician. A patient gets up and gives a heartfelt toast to the doctor for all the babies he brought into the world. Then, Charlie Munger stands up, raises his glass, and in a completely deadpan voice says he wants to toast the same doctor for the thousands of babies he didn't deliver. You can just imagine the dead silence in that room.
It's a stark, unforgettable moment that just shows you the depth of his conviction. So really, the story of Charlie Munger and the Blues case is a powerful reminder, isn't it? The next time you think you've got some public figure all figured out, just remember the conservative Republican who secretly became one of the architects of abortion rights in America. It really forces you to ask, what other hidden convictions are shaping our world right now, completely out of sight?
You know, when we think of Charlie Munger, we picture this brilliant, unflappable mind, the architect behind Berkshire Hathaway, a guy known for his incredible intellect and razor-sharp wit. But today, we're going to dive into a story that you probably haven't heard. It's a story from the late 1970s, where his biggest professional gamble collided head-on with a personal crisis so devastating, it was a true trial by fire that would forge the man we know today and completely change how he saw the world. And this quote right here from the book of Proverbs, it really sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about. This isn't just a story about a business deal. Not at all. It's a profound test of one man's inner strength when he's faced with the kind of adversity that, let's be honest, would break most people. This is the story of Charlie Munger's crucible. All right, so let's jump back in time. It's the summer of 1977. Now, at this point, Buffett and Munger were definitely respected investors, but they weren't the titans we think of today. This move, this gamble, this was them stepping onto a much bigger and a far riskier stage. Now, here's what I love about how this all started. This wasn't some polished, slick boardroom takeover. I mean, just picture this. Charlie Munger is at a lakeside cabin with his family, his kids are running around, and he's feeding coin after coin into a payphone at the marina so he and Warren Buffett can map out their plan to buy a major newspaper. It's just such a humble, unpretentious start to what would become an incredibly high-stakes fight. And when I say high stakes, I'm not kidding. That price tag, $32.5 million, it was a colossal bet. Think about it. That was nearly a quarter of Berkshire Hathaway's entire net worth at the time. They were basically pushing a huge stack of their chips to the center of the table for one single newspaper in a Rust Belt city that was already in decline. And this quote, it just perfectly captures Munger's mindset. When he goes to tour the newspaper's brand new, fancy architect-designed building, his first reaction isn't awe. It's just pure, pragmatic disgust. He sees leaky, artsy construction and balconies you can't even use, and his mind immediately goes to the waste. For him, this wasn't just a bad building. It was a symptom of the lazy, flawed thinking that they were there to fix. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because the business challenge in Buffalo, that was only half of it. As Munger started to wage this brutal business war, a second, far more terrifying private battle was just about to begin. He was now fighting a war on two fronts. So let's look at the business battlefield. The Evening News was doing okay during the week, but its main competitor, the Courier Express, absolutely owned the Sunday market. And Sunday is where the real money was. Munger and Buffett knew that in the newspaper game, it's pretty much a winner-take-all situation. So their response was swift and it was aggressive, launch their own Sunday edition, and practically give it away to starve out the competition. Well, that move was like dropping a bomb on the market. And the reaction was instantaneous. The Courier Express turned right around and sued them for antitrust violations. Suddenly, Munger and Buffett hadn't just bought a newspaper. As one of their colleagues put it, they had bought a lawsuit. The business war was officially on, and it was about to trap them in a legal mess for years. And just as this huge public battle was getting started, the private war began. Charlie was 52 years old, right in the thick of this intense corporate fight, and people close to him started to notice something was terribly wrong. He was having trouble reading. This quote from his colleague, Bob Denham, really drives home just how serious this was. I mean, for a man like Charlie Munger, whose entire superpower was his ability to read and just devour information, this wasn't just a health problem. This was an existential threat. The very tool that defined him was failing. So the diagnosis comes in and it's grim, rapidly developing severe cataracts in both of his eyes. And in a really tragic twist, Munger himself suspected the cause was just an act of youthful carelessness, using a sun lamp without any eye protection when he was a boy, having no idea of the devastating price he'd paid decades later. The abstract fear of going blind was suddenly a very real and very terrifying possibility. So this brings us to the breaking point, where both of these crises, the one in the business and the one in his body, they just collide.
The pressure was mounting from every direction, creating this perfect storm that was about to test Munger to his absolute limits. The newspaper war was just bleeding them dry financially. In 1979 alone, the news lost $4.6 million. And you have to remember, at that time, that was a staggering amount of money. Munger later said he would sit there and do the math himself, calculating exactly how much of his own family's fortune was on the line. The financial pressure was just immense, and it was deeply personal. And then, the medical crisis became a full-blown catastrophe. In 1978, he has surgery on his left eye. And in what must have been a painful moment of self-reflection, Munger later admitted he'd made a mistake. He chose an older procedure over a newer one. He then fell victim to a rare complication. Cells from the outside of his eye got inside. They multiplied like crazy, and the pressure just skyrocketed, completely destroying the optic nerve. He was now permanently blind in his left eye. And the physical pain was just unimaginable. His own words say it all, like a wounded animal. The pain was so intense that in 1980, he made the agonizing decision to have doctors remove the internal parts of his eye. You see, he had realized that one thing was worse than having a blind eye that was in constant, excruciating pain. But here's the incredible part. As Munger was enduring this unbelievable personal loss, the tide was slowly, finally beginning to turn in Buffalo. A victory was on the horizon. But my God, it was coming at an almost unbelievable cost. Look, this was no quick win. This was a brutal 5-year war of attrition. They fought that lawsuit for 2 years before they finally got it overturned. They bled money through a nasty recession. And then finally, in September of 1982, their competitor just raised the white flag and folded. The war was over. They had won. And when you look at the results of that victory, they took a paper that was making about $1.7 million, went through years of catastrophic losses, like that $4.6 million hole in 1979, and turned it into an absolute powerhouse that today brings in around $53 million in pre-tax profit every year. The financial gamble, it paid off spectacularly. But what about the personal war? Well, with a cataract now threatening his good eye, his right eye, Munger's approach was pure hard-won pragmatism. This is classic Munger right here. It's that principle of inversion. Instead of asking, how do I get the best possible outcome, he asked, how do I avoid another catastrophe? He told the doctors to take 0 chances, just get the lens out. He chose function over form, safety over aesthetics. He would simply adapt to whatever came next. And this brings us right back to where we started. Charlie Munger didn't just survive this whole ordeal, he proved his strength in the day of adversity. He completely rebuilt his life around his new reality. And in doing so, he gave all of us a masterclass in what it truly means to be resilient. His adaptation was just remarkable. With his new thick glasses, his one good eye actually had razor-sharp 20/15 vision. He taught himself a whole new system for driving, literally counting the cars in his rearview mirror to find a gap to safely change lanes. He even, for a moment, looked into learning Braille, preparing for the worst-case scenario, before he realized he would still be able to read. And boy, did he read. Becoming an even more voracious consumer of knowledge, building that famous latticework of mental models that would come to define his wisdom. This quote from his daughter, Wendy, is just so poignant. It's a reminder of the permanent, visible mark this whole battle left on him. To the world, he became this icon with the thick glasses, but to his family, it was a constant reminder of the painful trial that separated the before from the after. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The Buffalo News was a monumental financial success, no question about it. But when you look at Charlie Munger's story, it forces you to ask, how do you really measure the true price of that success? The cost wasn't just a number on a balance sheet. It was etched onto the man himself, a permanent change that, you could argue, forged the very wisdom we all came to admire. So, everyone knows Charlie Munger, right? Warren Buffett's brilliant, sharp-tongued partner at Berkshire Hathaway. But today, we're going to dig into a story that's a little less known and, frankly, a lot more brutal. This is the story of the time Munger basically declared war on an entire industry, and his only weapons were his principles and a poison pen. We're going to see how he saw a trillion-dollar disaster coming years before anyone else, and what his unique brand of wisdom can still teach us today. Look, to really get this story, you have to understand the man himself. Charlie Munger never, ever minced words. And this quote, it's the perfect window into his mind. Some things are just so fundamentally bad that you can't dress them up, You can't average them out with a few good things, you just have to call them what they are. And that is exactly what he was about to do to one of America's most powerful financial industries. All right, so our story doesn't actually take place inside the massive empire of Berkshire Hathaway. Nope, it's centered on a much smaller company, a place that became the canvas for Munger's own personal masterpiece. And, as it turns out, the front line of his coming war. Think of it this way. If Berkshire was this giant, sprawling canvas where Warren Buffett was painting his legacy for the whole world, Wesco Financial was Munger's smaller, more intimate studio. He was its chairman, and it started out as a holding company for a small savings and loan, which gave him this incredible, ground-level view of a system that he was convinced was rotting from the inside out. Okay, let's set the scene. It's the early 1980s. The financial world is just buzzing about deregulation. It feels like there's endless opportunity everywhere. But Charlie Munger, he wasn't celebrating. He saw something else. With just startling clarity, he saw a perfect storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that was about to absolutely wreck an entire industry. Now, for those of you who don't remember them, savings and loans, or S&Ls, were supposed to be the bedrock of American homeownership. I mean, they were designed to be simple, stable, heavily regulated. You put your savings in, they lent it out to your neighbor for a mortgage. It was a pretty straightforward, if maybe a little boring business model. But then, boom, the rules of the game just got completely rewritten. Munger saw this toxic cocktail being mixed. First, new, unregulated competitors started stealing their customers. So to help the S&Ls, the government suddenly let them make way riskier loans and investments. But here's the fatal ingredient, the real poison. At the exact same time, they massively increased federal deposit insurance. This created what's called a moral hazard. I mean, just imagine going to a casino and gambling with house money. If you win, you keep all the profits. If you lose, well, the taxpayer covers your losses. Munger saw this and knew this wasn't a recipe for success, it was a recipe for an absolute national disaster. And this is where it gets kind of chilling. We're talking years before this crisis blew up in the headlines. Munger just laid it all out in a 1983 letter to his shareholders at Wesco. He predicted, clear as day, that this new free-for-all would lead to reckless behavior and widespread insolvencies. He wasn't just guessing, he was diagnosing a fatal disease before the patient even knew they were sick. But here's the thing about Munger. He didn't just write letters and complain. He and Buffett, they took action. They saw the turds being mixed in with the raisins all across the industry, and they just decided they wanted no part of it. So they began to systematically pivot Wesco away from the S&L business, all while getting ready for a huge opportunity they knew the coming chaos was bound to create. By 1988, the industry was getting crazier by the day. But Munger and Buffett, they just sat down and tuned out all that noise. For 3 hours, they focused on one single problem. And out of that one conversation came a decision that would not only save Wesco from the collapse, but would also become one of the most legendary investments of their entire careers. They decided to invest in Freddie Mac, one of the two giants that package and guarantee home loans. Through Wesco's S&L, they plowed in $72 million. Now that sounds simple, but here's the critical part. At the time, only S&Ls could legally own this specific class of stock, and $72 million was the absolute legal maximum they were allowed to buy. They bet the farm. And the results? It was just brilliant. A little over a decade later, that $72 million pet was worth $1.38 billion. Think about that. While all the other S&Ls were blowing themselves up gambling on junk bonds and shady real estate deals, Munger and Buffett used their unique position to make one single, massive, genius-level bet on the most stable part of the entire housing market. Munger himself explained their whole approach with this quote, "It's not about trying to be a genius every single day. No, it's about having immense patience, doing your homework, and then, when a truly obvious no-brainer opportunity comes along, you have to have the guts to act, and act in a big way." This was one of those rare moments. By 1989, Munger's private warnings had become this horrifying public reality. S&Ls were failing left and right, a massive taxpayer bailout was taking shape, and the whole thing just stank of corruption. Munger had seen enough. His private concerns were about to become a very public and very, very brutal declaration of war. So what did he do? He drafted a formal letter of resignation for Wesco's S&L from the industry's most powerful lobbying group. And he did not pull any punches. He opened by calling the whole crisis the largest mess in the entire history of American finance. And then he just turned the heat way up. He compared the crisis to cancer and then flat out accused the League, the very group supposed to be upholding the industry's standards, of being a carcinogenic agent. He was saying their lobbying caused the disease. I mean, this is not the language of polite business disagreement. This was a public execution. And here is the knockout blow. He accused the League of running political cover for institutions dominated by crooks and fools. Then, just to make sure the message landed like a bomb, he and Buffett deliberately sent copies of the letter straight to the media. The fight was on, and it was public. So how did the powerful League respond to this public shaming? Well, they basically just shrugged. A spokesman told the press they were just representing what their members wanted. And get this, even said some members were quitting because the League wasn't fighting hard enough against reforms. The establishment just dug in its heels. But Munger, of course, would be vindicated. The S&L crisis unfolded exactly as he warned, becoming one of the biggest financial scandals in the nation's history. And in the aftermath, Wesco, the little company at the heart of his fight, would be transformed forever by the very crisis it had so brilliantly navigated. The final price tag is just mind-boggling. Some estimates put the ultimate cost to U.S. taxpayers at $1 trillion. $1 trillion? That's about $4,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country at the time. That was the bill for the mess created by the crooks and fools Munger had tried to warn everyone about. And here's the ultimate irony. The new regulations designed to clean up the industry made it pretty much impossible for even a well-run, conservative outfit like Wesco's S&L to operate the way Munger and Buffett demanded. So what did they do? They just walked away. They gave up the charter, sold everything off, and remade Wesco into a financial holding company focused on insurance, a business they actually understood, trusted, and could run rationally. So, after all that, what's the big lesson here? What can we take away from this whole saga? It's not some secret for finding the next complicated, brilliant investment. For Munger, the real superpower, the thing that let him see the crisis, profit from it, and fight it on principle, was actually something much, much simpler. This quote is pure Munger. It's the core of his entire philosophy. He believed the real advantage in life and investing doesn't come from flashes of genius. It comes from the relentless, disciplined avoidance of obvious, dumb mistakes. The S&L industry was making a colossally stupid, system-wide error, and Munger's greatest skill was simply seeing it for what it was and having the strength to stay far, far away. He often used this saying, and it's perfect. The strong swimmers are the ones who get overconfident. They venture out too far, thinking they can handle any risk. The S&L operators thought they were being clever, gaming the system. But Munger knew that real strength lies in recognizing which waters are just too dangerous to even get into in the first place. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Munger and Buffett didn't have some complex algorithm to predict this crisis. They just used fundamental common sense, incredible patience, and the courage to act when something was either glaringly wrong or glaringly right. In our world today, which is filled with so much more noise and complexity, maybe that is the ultimate advantage after all, just having the clarity to see what's obvious and the patience to wait for it.
Picture this. You're in a courtroom. Not for some big, flashy criminal trial, but for a pretty dry case about a small legal publication. And who's on the witness stand? None other than Charlie Munger, one of the sharpest business minds of our time. And what unfolds next? Well, it's not just testimony. It's a completely unfiltered masterclass on the philosophy that built the absolute juggernaut we know as Berkshire Hathaway.
So let's really dig into what makes this testimony so special. See, this isn't some rehearsed speech or polished letter to shareholders. This is Munger, under oath, being asked to explain the absolute core ideas of his life's work. It's a rare chance to get inside the unfiltered thinking behind a multi-hundred-billion-dollar empire.
So the attorney kicks things off with what seems like a totally straightforward question. You know, he's just trying to set the scene, establish Munger's credentials for the jury, but he has no idea he's just lobbed a softball that's about to reveal the very heart of the entire Berkshire Hathaway philosophy.
And bam, there it is, right out of the gate. Munger just completely dismisses that hyperactive, frantic trading culture you see everywhere else. He calls it gin rummy management. You know, this idea of constantly shuffling your cards, always looking for the next play. Berkshire, they do the exact opposite. They bought tons of companies and sold, what, maybe 2? Their game isn't trading, it's owning.
Okay, so this buy and hold idea, it sounds simple, right? But how in the world do you find a company that's actually worth that kind of lifelong commitment? Well, Munger's testimony shows that their whole process, it starts with a number, sure, but it absolutely does not end there, not even close.
This is the perfect follow-up question. The lawyer's basically asking Munger to pop the hood on the Berkshire engine and show everyone, including us, how the machine actually works. How do you tell the difference between a truly great business and one that's just, pretty good? And Munger just lays it out in these 4 deceptively simple steps. Yeah, you start with the accounting, the balance sheets and all that. But that's just step 1. Step 2 is where it gets interesting. What do those numbers really mean? What story are they telling you? Then you got to get off the spreadsheet and start asking smart questions to figure out what's actually going on. And finally, and this is huge, you assess the people running the show. And Munger delivers his point with such force. It's a direct warning. He's saying accounting is just a language. It's not the whole story. If you're just a numbers cruncher, a spreadsheet jockey, you are guaranteed to fail. And not just fail, but fail spectacularly, because numbers can be misleading. And more importantly, they can't tell you about the things that really matter, like a company's real competitive strength or the character of its leaders.
So the attorney picks right up on that last point. He zeroes in on what might be the most important and also the hardest to measure, part of their whole process. He wants to confirm, hey, are the people running this company really that big of a deal in your analysis?
And Munger's answer is just 2 words. You bet. It's so blunt, so perfect, it tells you everything. Forget the spreadsheets for a second. At the end of the day, they are betting on people. They are looking for managers with brains, integrity, and a passion for the business that's like they own the place themselves.
So where did this incredibly powerful philosophy come from? I mean, it wasn't just dreamt up in some boardroom. It was forged in the real world over decades, and it all started with what Warren Buffett himself calls one of his absolute worst financial mistakes. Just look at this timeline. It shows the slow, deliberate, almost accidental evolution. This wasn't some grand plan from day one. It started with Buffett buying into a dying textile mill in New England. For 20 years, he tried to make it work, but in '85, he finally had to throw in the towel and shut it down. The Berkshire Hathaway we know today is literally built on the empty corporate shell of that failure.
Munger never minces words, does he? Doomed, that's the word he uses. And that painful experience taught them one of their most valuable lessons. As Buffett would say later, it is so much better to be in a great business with a strong tailwind pushing you along than to be a genius manager in a terrible business with a headwind constantly smacking you in the face.
Okay, so with that huge lesson learned and the new corporate structure ready to go, they were ready. They stopped messing around with doomed businesses and they started buying wonderful ones. And they didn't just dip a toe in the water. No, they started making these huge, concentrated bets that made them legends. Their first massive opportunity came knocking in 1976. The insurance company Geico was an absolute mess, right on the brink of bankruptcy. Seriously, it was dire. Most investors were running for the hills as fast as they could. But Buffett and Munger, they saw something completely different. They looked past the chaos and saw a fundamentally brilliant business that was just temporarily screwed up by bad management. So they went all in, investing $45 million when everybody else was terrified. And just look at the result. By 1995, that stake was worth almost $2 billion. They trusted the business model, not the market panic, and boy, did it pay off. Then came the one that really defined Munger's influence. For years, he'd been pushing Buffett to stop buying just cheap companies and to start buying truly high-quality ones, businesses with these powerful, durable brands that could fend off any competition. And then 1988, they found the ultimate example.
Over $1 billion. You have to understand, at the time, this was a massive, massive bet. But it wasn't a bet on next quarter's earnings. It was a bet on the simple power of a brand. The idea that people all over the planet would keep drinking Coke for generations to come. It was a bet on a business that was practically invincible.
But what happens after they buy a company like Coca-Cola or Geico? I mean, how do they actually run this sprawling empire of dozens of totally different businesses? Well, their method is so unconventional, it is almost bizarre compared to any other modern corporation.
I love this comparison. On one side, you've got your typical big company. Huge headquarters, endless meetings, strategic plans, bureaucracy, you know the drill. And on the other side, Berkshire, a tiny headquarters staff, no master plan. Munger once said that when they got a subpoena demanding their staff papers on an acquisition, they had to write back and say,
Sorry, there are no papers because there is no staff. They decentralize power to a point Munger calls just short of total abdication.
And this quote just sums it all up perfectly. Their job isn't to meddle. It's not to bring in a bunch of consultants or force some Berkshire way onto their companies. Their job is to find brilliant, dedicated managers, give them the capital they need, and then get the hell out of their way. They create the perfect environment for great managers to thrive, and that's it.
So, you've got this unique philosophy of buying great businesses with great managers and this totally unconventional management style of just leaving them alone. What's the end result of all this? Well, the numbers are almost hard to believe.
The result is just staggering. A single $10,000 investment in Berkshire back in 1965, if you just sat on it, would have been worth over $51 million by the end of 1998. Let that sink in. That kind of return doesn't happen because of complex algorithms or frantic trading. It comes from patience, discipline, and an unbreakable long-term vision.
And this right here, this brings us to the most important lesson of all. The secret to Berkshire Hathaway. It isn't some hidden, complicated formula. It's the relentless focus on mastering a few simple but powerful ideas. Buy wonderful businesses. Trust great managers. Be patient. Don't make things more complicated than they need to be. The blueprint is right there for everyone to see, but so few people have the discipline to actually follow it.
And Munger leaves us with this final, challenging thought. A shareholder once complained that there weren't any more obvious, great opportunities like Coca-Cola left to buy. Munger just fired back with this question. The message is crystal clear: making real, life-changing generational wealth. It's not supposed to be easy. It takes discipline, it takes patience, and it takes the wisdom to act boldly when one of those great ideas finally comes along. It's simple, but it is not easy.
All right, let's talk about Berkshire Hathaway in the 1990s. Now, this was the decade. This wasn't just about making money. This was a period of intense strategic power building. I mean, they completely reshaped the company and basically cemented their legendary status. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off? Let's get into it. So to understand anything about how they operated, you have to start right here with this core idea from Charlie Munger. It's so simple, but so profound. The game isn't about being the smartest person in every room. No way. It's about knowing exactly where you are the smartest person and staying there. This whole idea of a circle of competence, well, that was the bedrock for, well, pretty much every big move they made. But here's the kicker, right? This was the massive problem staring Buffett and Munger right in the face as the 90s began. Berkshire was already a giant. I mean, the pile of cash they were sitting on was just getting enormous. So what do? How do you keep finding these brilliant investments that are actually big enough to move the needle? It's a classic good problem to have, but it's a huge problem nonetheless. Okay, so here's how we're going to break down how they solve this whole puzzle. We'll start with that anchor of size, then get into their big shift to buying businesses, not just stocks. We'll look at the insurance fortress that fueled everything, talk about let's call it a humbling experience with US Air, peek into their contrarian playbook, and then wrap it all up with what became known as the Berkshire model. Right? The anchor of size. You gotta love Munger's phrasing, drags you down. He was never one to sugarcoat things, was he? He saw their incredible success as a potential curse. Look, it's one thing to get a great return on $1 million. It's a totally different ballgame when you're trying to do it with billions. The universe of smart things you can do just shrinks dramatically. They knew they had to change. And here it is. This was their absolutely brilliant answer to that anchor of size. They realized, hey, we have to change the game we're playing. So instead of just nibbling on companies, buying little pieces through the stock market, they started buying the whole company, swallowing them whole. I mean, this was a massive psychological shift. They went from being passive investors to active, full-on owners. And this really lays out why that shift was such a game changer. Think about it. It's the difference between betting on a horse and owning the horse, the jockey, and the entire racetrack. You know? As just another stockholder, you're at the mercy of the market's crazy mood swings. But when you own the company, you can just tune out all that Wall Street noise. And here's the most important part. You get control over all the cash that company makes. You decide where it goes. And that creates this incredible, powerful compounding machine right inside Berkshire. Just look at the speed of this thing. It's wild. In just 3 years, 3 years, the whole makeup of Berkshire's assets completely flipped. They went from being mostly a collection of stocks in 1996 to being mostly a collection of whole companies by 1999. I mean, that's not an accident. That is a deliberate, massive, and incredibly fast strategic pivot. And believe me, they put their money where their mouth was. $27.3 billion. That's what they spent in just those 3 years to buy up 7 whole companies. So this wasn't some slow, gradual change. Nope, this was them going full throttle, executing on this new strategy to fight back against the drag of their own size.
So you're probably asking, okay, where did all that cash come from? Well, the answer lies deep in the engine room of Berkshire Hathaway. And that engine is their collection of absolutely incredible insurance businesses. See, Munger and Buffett got something that most people didn't. Insurance wasn't just another business for them. It was the rocket fuel. It was a secret sauce that gave them an advantage pretty much nobody else could touch.
Now, to really get why their insurance business was so powerful, you have to understand this one word, float. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Look, insurance companies collect all our premiums up front, right? But they don't have to pay out the claims until way later, sometimes years later. So that giant pile of cash they're just holding on to in the meantime, that's the float. And for Buffett and Munger, this was like a massive long-term loan, but they didn't have to pay any interest on. It is, and I'm not kidding here, the closest thing to a real-life infinite money cheat code you will ever find in the world of finance. And the scale we're talking about here is just staggering. I mean, look at this. They started with less than $9 million back in '67. By the late 90s, that insurance capital had exploded to over $10 billion. So that cheat code we just talked about, this was their ever-growing war chest. This is what paid for that massive shopping spree. And then came the big one, the absolute peak of their insurance strategy. In 1998, they spent a mind-boggling $22 billion to buy the reinsurance giant General Re. Analysts at the time were calling it a watershed event, and Buffett himself said, "We are creating Fort Knox." He wasn't exaggerating. This one move didn't just add to their float, it basically made Berkshire an untouchable giant in the insurance world. Game over. Okay, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The 90s weren't just a story of uninterrupted genius. Oh no. They made mistakes too. And their bet on US Air? Hoo boy, that was a big one. It was this really powerful, humbling reminder that even the absolute best investors on the planet can step into a complete and total mess. And you just have to love Munger's description of the airline industry. Marginal cost with wings. I mean, that just perfectly nails the brutal economics of it, doesn't it? In this timeline, man, it just shows you how painful this whole ordeal was. So they put in $358 million in 1990. By 94, US Air just stops paying them their dividends. A year after that, their investment had plummeted. It was worth less than a quarter of what they paid for it. It looked like an absolute, unmitigated disaster. And then, honestly, through what was mostly a stroke of luck and a big industry turnaround, they managed to get their money back in '98. They got incredibly lucky. And here's what's so crucial about this whole story. It's Munger's honesty. I mean, listen to that. There's no spin, no excuses. He just openly admits, yeah, we messed up. That was not our finest hour. That kind of humility is so rare, especially at that level. And you have to believe it's a huge part of why they've been so successful for so long. And you can just feel the raw frustration in this, can't you? This wasn't some abstract number on a spreadsheet for him. He felt it. The pain of watching hundreds of millions of dollars just melt away, dealing with all the union problems, what he calls the idiot competition. He's telling you straight up, this was a miserable, unpleasant experience, a lesson they learned the hard way, for sure. All right, so moving on from their mistakes, the 90s also showed something else really important about them. Their absolute willingness to be deeply contrarian, to go against the herd. And you have to remember, their unique structure, all that permanent capital from the insurance business, no nervous clients breathing down their necks, it gave them the firepower and the patience to make these huge, unconventional bets that basically no one else could even dream of. And you want to talk about unconventional? Look no further than their big bet on silver. So while the rest of the world was going absolutely nuts over the dot-com bubble, pets.com and all that, Buffett and Munger were quietly buying up a massive pile of actual, physical silver. The logic was pure, simple, old-school them. They just looked at the numbers and saw that industry needed more silver than the mines were producing, and they figured, sooner or later, the price has to go up. It was this classic, fundamental bet on something everyone else was completely ignoring. And then there's Costco. Munger's involvement here is just a perfect example of his conviction. This is a guy who had rules, strict rules, and one of them was not sitting on outside boards. But he admired Costco's business model so much that he broke his own rule for them. He saw how they created this almost fanatical customer loyalty by selling great stuff at razor-thin margins. He knew it was something special, a true franchise. I love this quote from Buffett. It's fantastic because it shows you two really important things. First, you see just how much influence Munger had on him. Charlie was in his ear, constantly, saying, Warren, you gotta look at this thing. And second, you see Buffett's own humility. Again, he's openly admitting he made a mistake. And not just any mistake, but what he calls his most common mistake. What was it? Not buying more of a fantastic business, just because the price went up a little. It's a lesson for all of us, really. Okay, so when you step back and you put all these different pieces together, the big shift to buying whole companies, that incredible insurance engine, the painful lessons from their failures, and these bold contrarian bets, what you start to see is the blueprint. This is the modern Berkshire Hathaway. The 1990s, this was the decade where the model was really forged in fire. So if you had to boil it all down, what exactly is the Berkshire way? Well, it really comes down to these core ideas. First, you stick to what you know, that circle of competence. You provide patient capital, meaning you let great managers do their thing for the long haul. You buy whole companies so you can control their profits. You use that unbelievable insurance float as your rocket fuel. You've got to be willing to be a contrarian to stand apart from the crowd. And maybe most importantly, you have to accept the short-term craziness of the market to win in the long run. But, and this is a really important but, Munger himself gives us a critical warning. He says, look, it would be a huge mistake to think this is the right model for everyone. In fact, he said it would be an absolute disaster if every company tried to become a Berkshire clone. Their model is totally unique. It's built for them, for their specific talents, their unique structure, and their once-in-a-lifetime partnership. It's their path, not some universal blueprint for success. And so that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. The Berkshire model, this whole philosophy, was perfected back in the 90s. That feels like a different world, right? So in today's world, a world that is completely obsessed with speed, with quarterly results, with the next big thing, is their patient, long-game strategy, is it still the ultimate way to win? Or is it just an old artifact from a bygone era? That's a question we're thinking long and hard about. All right, let's get into one of the most incredible corporate dramas in modern history. Seriously, this is a story about a massive crime, a 4-month lie, and the moment two absolute legends, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, had to parachute in to save one of Wall Street's biggest firms from total, utter collapse. So let's set the scene. It's the summer of 1991, and you're looking at Salomon Brothers. Now, back then, this firm wasn't just a big deal on Wall Street. For a lot of people, it was Wall Street, a true titan. But as you can imagine, behind that shiny facade, a storm was brewing. A scandal so big, it didn't just threaten the company. It threatened to send shockwaves through the entire U.S. financial system. And this really is the central question of the whole affair. What happens when a firm that's right at the heart of the system decides to cheat the U.S. government itself? I mean, this isn't just about breaking some obscure rule. This is about taking a sledgehammer to the fundamental trust that the entire global economy is built on. The consequences? Well, they were almost too scary to even think about. And get this, the crisis explodes when our two main guys are completely off the map. You've got Warren Buffett getting this frantic call at a payphone in the middle of a loud restaurant. At the same time, Charlie Munger, a guy who never breaks a summer vacation, gets news so bad that his family sees him for the first time ever put on a suit jacket over his swim trunks. That's how you know it's serious. So what was the big crime? What was all the fuss about? In simple terms, Salomon Brothers got caught red-handed, rigging the U.S. Treasury market. You know, the place where the U.S. government literally borrows money to keep the lights on. And the scale of it is just mind-blowing. A single illegal bid worth $12.2 billion. Now, to really grasp how bad this was, you need to understand what Salomon was. They were a primary dealer. Think of it as an ultra-exclusive club with only about 40 members worldwide. It gave them the incredible privilege to buy securities straight from the U.S. Treasury. But that status was built on one thing and one thing only: absolute, unimpeachable trust. And Salomon had just lit that trust on fire.
So how in the world did it get to this point? Let's take a look at how the actions of one really ambitious trader, fueled by a culture of pure aggression, almost brought the entire financial house of cards crashing down. Okay, so at the very center of this whole mess was a 34-year-old trader named Paul Moser. The guy didn't just bend the rules, he snapped them in half. See, the Treasury has this super strict 35% limit on how much any one firm can buy at an auction, and that's to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. Moser? Well, he secretly used his clients' names, without their permission, by the way, to blow way past that limit. And his goal? To corner the market on a specific bond so he could squeeze his competitors for every penny. Now, you have to ask yourself, how did an environment like that even exist? Well, this quote from Salomon's CEO, the legendary John Goodfriend, they called him the King of Wall Street. It tells you everything you need to know. The culture at this firm was off the charts aggressive. It was a place where pushing boundaries wasn't just okay, it was basically celebrated. So is it really any surprise that someone finally went way, way too far? But here's the thing. The illegal trades were just the first part of the disaster. The second part, which was arguably way worse, was the cover-up. The problem wasn't just that a crime happened. It was that the guys at the very top knew all about it, and they chose to do absolutely nothing. I mean, just look at this timeline. It is just staggering. Top management, including the CEO, finds out about the crime in late April. They talk about it, they all agree it has to be reported, and then crickets. Nothing. For 4 agonizing months, they just sat on this ticking time bomb. It's not until early August that Buffett and Munger even get the first phone calls about it, and even those were misleading. And the excuse they gave? It's a classic. When the board finally dragged them in and demanded to know why they waited 4 months to report a crime that could kill the entire firm, their answer was, and I am not making this up, the press of other business. As you can imagine, the board went absolutely ballistic. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a catastrophic failure of leadership. Charlie Munger, who never pulls a punch, had a much more direct take on Goodfriend's total inaction. He called it a thumb-sucking response. How's that for irony? The same guy who told his traders to bite the ass off a bear was suddenly paralyzed, unable to make a decision at the most critical moment of his career. So this is the turning point. Management has zero credibility left. The firm is maybe days, maybe even hours away from being shut down by the US government. And that's when Buffett and Munger are forced to step in and take control. A new sheriff was officially in town, and they brought a totally different playbook. And the difference between the two approaches could not be more clear. The old guard strategy was all about damage control. Delay, hide the facts, and just hope it all goes away. The Buffett and Munger playbook was the exact opposite. Get everything out in the open, cooperate 100%, and focus on the only thing that mattered anymore: restoring trust. This was the mantra Munger brought to the chaos. It's so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. When you're in a crisis, you don't try to manage the story. You get out ahead of it with total, brutal honesty. This simple idea guided every single decision they made from that point forward. So with this new playbook, their first job was obvious. They had to clean house. They needed to take dramatic, decisive action to prove to regulators and to the entire world that Salomon was under new, trustworthy management, and the clock was ticking, loud. And man, they moved fast. We're talking about a single weekend. They fly to New York, force the resignations of the CEO and the president, and then, in a move that just shocked Wall Street, Warren Buffett himself takes over as interim CEO. They also made the critical call to waive attorney-client privilege, which basically told regulators, come on in, look at everything. We have absolutely nothing left to hide. And you have to understand, the stakes could not have been higher. Buffett said later that the situation was terrifying. The firm was so close to bankruptcy that lawyers were literally drafting the paperwork. If Salomon had collapsed, it would have set off a chain reaction, what he called a doomsday machine, across the entire financial system. So what was the end result of this massive corporate earthquake? Let's take a look at the final fallout for all the key players, and more importantly, the principles that literally saved Salomon from extinction. The scorecard here really tells the tale. Goodfriend was out, he was fined, and he was barred from ever running a securities firm again. Moser, the trader who lit the match, he actually went to prison. And Salomon, the firm itself,
It survived. It had to pay a monster $290 million fine, but thanks to Buffett, it dodged the corporate death penalty. But the story has a chilling little epilogue. You see that vice chairman, John Merriweather? He was only suspended, and he didn't just fade away. He took the core of his old trading team from Salomon and started a new hedge fund. You might have heard of it. Long-term capital management. The lesson wasn't learned. That culture of insane risk-taking just found a new place to live.
And just how much risk are we talking about? Well, at its peak, that new firm, LTCM, had portfolio exposure of $1.25 trillion. Its collapse in 1998 was so huge it required a bailout organized by the Federal Reserve, creating a crisis that made the original Salomon scandal look tiny by comparison.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Munger basically boiled down all the lessons from Salomon into 3 dead simple rules. When you're facing a huge problem, you face it head on. You don't try to hide it, and you have to act fast and you have to act decisively. It's a playbook that works for any crisis, whether it's in business or just in life. And we'll leave you with this final classic Mungerism, a cynical, but let's be honest, probably realistic view on the world of high finance. It kind of leaves you with a nagging question, doesn't it? When that much money and that much ambition are all swirling around in the same place, are these kinds of regrettable acts just inevitable? It's a sobering thought. Thanks for joining me.
So, when you hear the name Charlie Munger, you probably think Berkshire Hathaway. You think Warren Buffett. You think of this colossal fortune built on just pure, rational investing. But here's the thing. That's not the whole story, not even close. There's this other chapter, kind of tucked away from the Wall Street spotlight. It's about a small, often scrappy media empire he built. And honestly, it tells you more about the man himself, his quirks, his character, what he really believed in, than any stock chart ever could.
And there it is. I mean, that quote right there says it all, doesn't it? That's not just a witty one-liner, it's practically a mission statement. We're talking about a guy who is absolutely brilliant, sharp as a tack, and just completely, unapologetically himself. He approached everything in his life, whether it was a multi-billion-dollar deal or just a simple court testimony, totally on his own terms. And to really get a sense of who we're dealing with, we've got to go back in time. Let's go to a courtroom in 1999. Because it's when you put people under pressure, when the stakes are real, that's when you see who they truly are.
Okay, so picture this. Munger's own lawyer, who knew him all too well, pulls him aside and says, "Charlie, just be direct, stick to the facts, answer the question." But for Charlie Munger, a direct answer was like a boring, straight highway. He just couldn't resist taking the scenic route, He basically turned the witness stand into his own personal classroom.
As you can imagine, the lawyer on the other side, Thomas Girardi, well, he was not having it. You can just feel the steam coming out of his ears as he's complaining to the judge. He sees Munger turning his chair to face the jury, talking about losing money, and he's thinking, this is pure theater. He's trying to be cute.
So an hour goes by, an hour of this. And Girardi's frustration just boils over. He stands up and basically tells the judge, look, this real smart guy over here has managed to dodge every single one of the 42 questions I've asked him. Munger's whole philosophical, rambling style was completely derailing the normal court process. The whole room was just baffled.
And just when you think the whole scene can't possibly get any weirder, it does. The tension is already high. The lawyers are on edge. And right in the middle of a sentence, Munger just stops and lets out this loud, pained howl. Bam! Every single person in that room, judge, jury, you name it, their heads just snap right towards him. You have to understand, as he's sitting there writhing on the stand, this billionaire isn't just feeling pain, he is performing it. It was just another wild twist in a testimony that was already off the rails. The opposing lawyer, probably terrified the jury was about to start weeping for him, immediately demanded they take a break. But Munger? He just stands up, works the cramp out, and says he's ready to keep going. He even shares a little life lesson with the entire court, saying, when you get as old as I am, it will happen to you. I mean, it was pure Munger. Totally unmanageable, completely unconventional, and you kind of have to admit, weirdly charming. So this whole insane courtroom drama, it really makes you wonder, right? How in the world did a billionaire investor, a guy famous for his cold, hard logic, end up in the messy, argumentative, and often money-losing business of legal newspapers? Well, to figure that out, we got to go back to the beginning. It all kicked off way back in 1977. Now, Munger and his partners were playing with huge amounts of money, but their entry into the media world was actually, for them, pretty small potatoes. They used their New America Fund to buy the Daily Journal for just $2.5 million.
For Munger, who'd had this fascination with newspapers his whole life, it was finally a chance to have one of his own.
And he definitely didn't just stop at one. So after they bought that first paper, the company went public in '86, and then Munger and his partner Rick Guerin, they started building. Step by step, they began buying up these smaller legal papers, partly to defend their territory and partly just to grow. And by 1997, it wasn't just one little paper anymore. It had become this small regional empire of 18 different publications.
Now this is what I find so fascinating. On the one hand, you have the main paper, the Daily Journal, very serious, very practical, a tool for lawyers. Frankly, kind of dull. But then on the other hand, you've got things like California Lawyer magazine, which was publishing these juicy, page-turning stories about fugitives in Mexico and scandals in the DA's office. It just goes to show, this wasn't just about owning a boring trade journal. He really loved all sides of the newspaper game.
Of course, if you're going to build an empire, even a small one, you better believe you're going to have to fight for it. And in the late 1980s, Munger came up against his biggest challenge yet, a young, ambitious rival who wanted to take over the West Coast.
Enter the challenger, a brash 36-year-old named Stephen Brill. This guy had already built a legal publishing powerhouse back east. He literally walks into the Daily Journal's offices and makes an offer to buy the whole company. Munger's response was fast, it was final, and it left zero room for discussion. We have no intention of selling at any price. The fight was on.
And what you get is this perfect clash of styles. It's like a business soap opera. You've got Brill, the young raider, all aggressive energy, poaching Munger's staff, vowing to crush him. And then you have Munger, the old guard, armed with the one weapon Brill couldn't beat, patient capital. As Brill himself said later, it was just maddening to compete against the guy so rich he didn't seem to care if he lost bales of money just to win.
For years, these two were just locked in this battle. Brill would make a move, and Munger would calmly respond by just buying up another small paper in the Bay Area, boxing him in. In the end, it was Brill who gave up. And years later, when somebody asked Munger about this incredibly expensive fight, he dropped this absolutely brutal, dismissive line. It just perfectly summed up how he saw the whole thing.
But winning that war? Well, it came with a heck of a price tag. One report said the Daily Journal's San Francisco paper was losing $2 million a year for 10 straight years, just to outlast Brill. Now, Munger always said those numbers weren't quite right, but his commitment was never in doubt. He flat out promised he would never ever shut that paper down. So you see, pretty quickly it becomes obvious this was about way more than just profit and loss.
So if this whole newspaper business wasn't really about making money, and a lot of the time it was actually about losing it, then why? Why did Charlie Munger pour so much of himself into such a tough, complicated business? What was the real endgame here?
Well, his longtime partner, Rick Guerin, gave us a pretty big clue. He said that beyond all the numbers, they felt like they had a higher purpose. It was this quiet little belief that by serving the justice system with their papers, they were actually doing something good. Something that, in their own small way, might just push civilization forward a tiny bit.
And when you piece it all together, you see it wasn't just one thing. Yeah, there was Munger's real, lifelong passion for the newspaper business, and there's that socially constructive idea. But you also can't forget that he just loved the thrill of the fight, the competition, and, of course, the deep satisfaction you get from building something and watching it grow.
But you know, if you want one single story that really reveals Charlie Munger's character, it's gotta be this one, about his deep, deep admiration for his hero, Benjamin Franklin. An admiration that led to this hilarious argument when they had to decorate a new office building.
So the city told them they had to spend a certain amount of money on public art for their new building. Charlie's immediate idea? A big bronze bust of Ben Franklin, looking all affable and wise, with his famous sayings carved into it. But his partner, Rick Guerin, had this amazing, blunt reaction. He basically told him, "Charlie, that's horse manure. Our employees don't want to be preached to by a statue when they come to work." He suggested something a little more fun. And believe it or not, Munger agreed. So they ended up with this lovely fountain with playful sea otters. But here's the key part that tells you everything about Charlie Munger. He compromised on the office decor, sure, but he didn't give up on the idea. He quietly went and hired an artist to make about 20 of those Franklin busts anyway, and he just gave them away to friends as gifts. He could be practical, but on his core principles, he was not going to budge.
And really, that's what this whole story boils down to. For Charlie Munger, the Daily Journal wasn't just an asset on a balance sheet, it was a battlefield. It was a platform for his values, and yeah, it was his own little way of advancing civilization an inch. It kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
What's the actual worth of something when profit is no longer the only way you keep score? All right, today we're going to dig into the mind of Charlie Munger. Now, when you hear that name, you probably think of investing, right? Warren Buffett's right-hand man, the guy with all the brutal one-liners. But we're not going to talk about stocks. Instead, we're going to uncover his entire philosophy on life through the absolutely wild story of one single failing hospital. It's a story of chaos and conflict, and it shows us exactly how he thought about solving really, really hard problems.
So Bosnia, that's a pretty intense way to describe a hospital, isn't it? But look, that's not an exaggeration. Back in the day, Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles was in a state of all-out civil war. It was hemorrhaging money, people were quitting left and right, and there were these deep, bitter factions fighting for control. And right in the middle of all this chaos was the chairman of the board, Charlie Munger. To really get his method, we have to start where this whole saga begins, with what has to be one of the strangest job interviews in history.
Okay, so the hospital's a mess, and it desperately needs a new president. It needs someone who can walk into this war zone and take control. The guy they have in mind is named Andrew Lika. He's a very experienced hospital administrator, but he is, shall we say, not exactly thrilled about the prospect. He knows it's a snake pit. But what he's about to walk into is his very first, very confusing lesson in the world according to Charlie Munger. So you have to picture this. Lika's driving across LA, and he's already got a bad feeling. He's heard all the rumors, he knows the place is a financial and political disaster. And worse, he's heard that the chairman, this Munger fella, is a huge part of the problem, a micromanager who makes everyone's life miserable. So he walks into this conference room, bracing for a tough interview. But let's be clear, nothing could have prepared him for what was actually about to happen.
The door just bursts open. In walks Munger. He doesn't say hello, doesn't even look at Lika, doesn't shake his hand. He just plops down at the table and starts talking. And for the next 40 minutes, he unloads. It's just this fire hose of information about every single thing wrong with the hospital. The finances, the infighting between doctors, the turf wars, on and on he goes. A relentless, nonstop diagnosis. And the whole time, he never asks Lika a single question. And then, just as suddenly as he started, he stops. He just stands up. Lika, he's a professional. He's trying to salvage this thing, so he stands up too and puts his hand out for a handshake. And Munger just walks right by him, doesn't even glance at him, just walks straight out the door. So Lika's left there, literally standing with his hand out, totally stunned. He turns to the other board members and just says, "Well, I don't think he likes me." And their response is instant. No, they say, "You've got it all wrong. He loved you."
So what in the world is going on here? I mean, your head would be spinning, right? The guy treats you like you're invisible, delivers a 40-minute lecture, and then snubs your handshake. That's not exactly a warm welcome. If he loved him, why the total blow-off? Well, the board members had an explanation that was so simple and so perfectly Munger, you'd never guess it.
Turns out he literally couldn't see the hand. It wasn't an insult, it was just a fact. Munger had lost his eye years earlier after a botched cataract surgery. And get this, the surgery that blinded him in that eye, it happened at that very same hospital. You can't make this stuff up. And that right there, that's your first real glimpse into Munger's world. What looks like arrogance is often just him dealing with the hard, unfiltered facts of a situation. He's living in reality, and he just expects you to keep up.
So, of course, Lika gets called back for a second meeting. This time, Munger cuts right to the chase. He says, "We want to hire you. Here's the salary. It's generous. What do you say?" And Lika does what any of us would do, right? He says, "This is a big decision. I need to go home and talk it over with my wife." And Munger's response is nothing. He doesn't say a word. He just stares at him. Complete, dead, awkward silence.
You can just feel the pressure in that room. Finally, Lika just caves. He says, "You know what, on second thought, I don't think I need to." He accepts the job, right then and there, and Munger immediately breaks his silence. "Good," he says. "That's why I'm hiring you." See, this wasn't about disrespecting Lika's wife, not at all. This was Munger's final test. The hospital was a burning building. He didn't need a guy who had to form a committee to find a fire extinguisher. He needed a general who could make a command decision right now.
All right, so Lika is in. He passed the world's weirdest job interview, and now he's the new president. With his decisive leader in place, Munger could finally start the real fight. And fight is absolutely the right word. This wasn't about tweaking a few things. This was a battle for the soul of a broken institution, a fight Munger knew he was walking into.
Munger had this great term for a problem like Good Samaritan. He called it a tar baby. You know, from the old folktale? The more you punch it, the more you struggle with it, the more stuck you get. He knew taking over this hospital board was a tar baby. It was messy, it was thankless, and the odds of failure were pretty darn high. But here's the thing. His personal code says that's exactly the kind of job a first-rate person is supposed to take on. He felt like he had a duty to get stuck in, precisely because he was the one pushing for all these uncomfortable changes.
So what was so broken anyway? Well, it was a deep systemic rot. For years, the board's unwritten rule was simple. Whatever the doctors want, the doctors get. They just rubber-stamped everything. The problem? The doctors were often making decisions to project their own turf and their own wallets, not what was actually best for the patients. It created this toxic culture of political warfare, especially in the really profitable departments like cardiology, where this old guard would crush any attempt at reform that threatened their little empire.
So here's the Munger playbook for fixing a mess like this. First, he didn't operate on opinions. He did the homework. He and a doctor friend dug into the cold, hard data, the mortality and morbidity rates. In other words, how many people were dying or having complications from certain procedures. He armed himself with facts nobody could argue with. Second, he didn't just complain in the hallways, he forced the issue. He put a formal resolution in front of the board to overturn a bad decision. Third, his case was so solid that the board voted overwhelmingly with him, 17-2. And finally, when the old chairman quit in a huff, Munger didn't blink. He stepped up and took the job himself. He took responsibility.
And man, the results of all that pain and conflict, they were just staggering. You look at this before and after, and it's like we're talking about two completely different institutions. It went from Bosnia, a place of constant infighting, to having clear, aligned leadership. From being on the brink of financial collapse to having huge cash reserves. It went from being just another local hospital to having nationally ranked specialty programs. But the biggest change was this. The whole game shifted from being about protecting doctors' income to being about what was best for the patient, period.
But this is the part that really gets me. Why? Why would a billionaire investor, a guy who could be sailing a yacht anywhere in the world, spend years of his life in this bitter, ugly, thankless fight? It's not for the money, obviously. It's not for fame. The answer goes right to the heart of his entire philosophy of life. Munger uses this specific word atone. Now, he doesn't mean it in a religious sense, like atoning for a sin. It's more like balancing the scales. He feels that if you've become incredibly wealthy through the capitalist system, you have a moral duty to give back. You have to atone for that success by going back into the system and fixing the hard, messy problems that the free market alone can't or won't solve.
So for Munger, this idea completely shapes what giving back even means. It's not about going to a fancy charity gala and writing a big check. No, it's about giving your time, your brain power, and maybe most importantly, being willing to risk your own reputation by getting into the mud and making people angry to get things done, just like he did at the hospital. He believes you should pick just a few important causes, stay within your circle of competence where you actually know what you're talking about, and focus all your energy there to make a real, tangible difference.
I think his stepson just nailed it with this quote. This really sums up the whole man. He actively seeks out the hard stuff. It's a core belief that a life well lived is not an easy one. You know? Anyone can look like a genius when they're dealt a winning hand of cards. The real test of character, the real source of meaning, comes from being dealt a tough hand, like a failing inner-city hospital, and playing it for all it's worth.
Okay, so this whole philosophy, this idea of deliberately taking on complex, messy problems, it doesn't just apply to his charity work. It extends directly into how he thinks about learning and why he believes our entire education system is, frankly, a bit of a disaster.
Munger's big beef with modern education is that it creates all these hyper-specialists. You know, people who are absolute geniuses in one narrow little field, but are often clueless outside of it. He famously said, "A man with a hammer sees every problem as a nail." But real-world problems aren't like that. Think about that hospital again. Was that just a medical problem? No way. It was a finance problem, a human psychology problem, a political problem, all rolled into one. And trying to solve that kind of multidisciplinary mess with a single unidisciplinary tool is, as he would say, bonkers.
So what's his solution? Well, he's not saying you have to become an expert in everything. That's just impossible. Instead, his big idea is to build what he calls a latticework of mental models.
Just think of it like a toolbox for your brain. You don't need every tool ever made, you just need the big, powerful ones from a handful of different disciplines. You grab the core concept of incentives from economics, the idea of feedback loops from biology, the power of compounding from math. You hang these big ideas on your mental latticework, and suddenly you have a much more powerful way to understand almost any problem the world throws at you.
So, we've talked about how he tackles problems, why he does it, and how he thinks we should learn. And it all kind of comes together. It all builds to this one final, incredibly powerful, and let's be honest, pretty tough, mental model. He calls it his iron prescription.
And there it is. That is pure 100-proof Munger. For him, the single most destructive emotion a human being can have is self-pity, the feeling that you're a victim. He thinks it's absolute poison, and he famously complained that universities are practically teaching it. This iron prescription is his antidote. It's this radical call for extreme ownership. And the logic, while it's brutal, is also incredibly empowering. The moment you stop blaming other people or unfair circumstances for your problems, you instantly take back the power to fix those problems. The power is with you.
And that really brings it all home, doesn't it? It leaves us with a pretty big question for ourselves. Munger's entire life seems to be a testament to this one idea, that a good life isn't found by avoiding problems, but by finding the right ones to tackle. He found his tar baby, his tough hand to play, in a chaotic hospital and a dozen other places. So the challenge he leaves us with is this: what's the difficult, messy, important problem that's worth getting stuck in for you? What's your tough hand to play?
All right, let's dive into the mind of one of the absolute sharpest thinkers of our time, Charlie Munger. Now, you probably know him as Warren Buffett's indispensable right-hand man, but he was so much more than that. He was a true master of rational thought, famous for just slicing through nonsense with this incredible, almost shocking clarity. So today, we're going to explore how he did it. And if you want to understand Charlie Munger, you have to start right here. This quote from the physicist Richard Feynman was basically Munger's operating system. It was his North Star. For him, the biggest, most unforgivable mistake you could make was lying to yourself. And he built his entire life around spotting that self-deception, first in himself, and then, very pointedly, in everyone else. You know, there is no better way to see Munger's war on fuzzy thinking than to just watch him in his natural habitat, a debate. This first story, it just perfectly captures his style. Okay, so picture this. It's 1996, a conference at the Cardozo School of Law. The moderator who was supposed to be there can't make it. So Munger steps in, and he opens with this line. It's so brilliant, right? He's making fun of himself, calling himself a bumpkin, which immediately disarms this whole room full of academics. But you can feel the steel underneath it. He's letting them know, I'm not one of you, but don't for a second think I can't run this show. So the topic of the day is dividend policy. A professor, William Bratton, gets up and lays out the standard textbook theory. An investment is a bad idea if its return is lower than the cost of capital. Munger just lets that hang in the air for a second, and then he pounces with the simplest question. And what is the cost of capital? Bratton explains that, well, in the model, it's just a number you plug in. And Munger's reply is just pure gold. Where? From the forehead of Jove or something? He's completely exposing the fatal flaw in the whole argument. It's all built on a number that's basically just pulled out of thin air. And that leads to this incredible checkmate moment. Munger asks if it's fair to call the theory gibberish, and the professor, to his immense credit, just owns it. He says it's perfectly understandable. Now, the reports from the event say the laughter in the room was really good-natured. This wasn't some personal attack. It was a masterclass in how to dismantle a flimsy idea just by poking at its very foundation. So that exchange shows us what Charlie Munger does. But the really interesting question is how? How did he build a mind that could think with that kind of precision? Well, the answer is in what he called his mental toolkit, a set of simple but unbelievably powerful ideas. At the very core of it all was this one simple question. Munger said if you want to get smart, the question you have to keep asking is why? He wasn't interested in surface-level answers. It was about digging and then digging some more until you really understood the fundamental structure of a problem, why a company is really succeeding, why a theory is failing, or why you yourself are behaving a certain way. And this brings us to his absolute favorite mental model. He introduced it in such a clever way. At a commencement speech back in 1986, instead of giving all these boring tips on how to succeed, he flipped the whole thing on its head and asked this question. He wanted the students to think about the problem completely backward. And this was his prescription. If you want to guarantee you'll be miserable, here's the recipe. Number 1, fill your life with envy and resentment. 2, be someone nobody can count on. 3, stubbornly refuse to learn from anyone else's mistakes, only your own. 4, the second you hit a roadblock, just quit. And 5, and this brings it all full circle, just let your thinking get lazy and fuzzy. See what he did? By spelling out exactly what not to do, the right path forward becomes blindingly obvious. This powerful technique has a name. It's called inversion. It's an idea Munger took from mathematics. So instead of always asking, how do I achieve success? You start by asking, what are all the ways I could possibly fail? If you can identify and then avoid all the causes of failure, you naturally drift toward success. It is a deceptively simple but profoundly effective way to get clarity on pretty much any problem you're facing. So you might be wondering, how did this mental toolkit actually apply to the world Munger is most famous for, investing? Well, as you can probably guess, his approach had absolutely nothing to do with the kind of academic gibberish he was so quick to call out. For Charlie, becoming a great investor started with understanding your own psychology. Can you stay rational when everyone else is panicking? After that, it was all about learning, constantly. He and Buffett would just devour business magazines, getting to see thousands of different business models over the years. And the whole game was to connect what they were reading back to basic, fundamental concepts, and to look for one thing above all else, a company's moat. A moat. That one word is everything in the Berkshire Hathaway philosophy. A moat is a company's durable, competitive advantage. It's something that protects the business from all the invaders and competitors, just like a real moat protects a castle. But what does that actually look like in the real world? Munger had this beautifully simple way of explaining it. Wrigley's gum. Think about it. The brand is so powerful, the habit of chewing it is so ingrained in your mind that you're just not going to risk saving a few pennies to try some unknown brand called Glotz's gum. It's not worth the thought, it's not worth the risk of it tasting bad. That powerful brand, that automatic customer choice, that is an economic moat. This is just classic Munger. So blunt, so direct. It perfectly sums up how he felt about most of what was taught in finance departments. He had zero time for theories that he felt were totally disconnected from the reality of how businesses actually work. And modern portfolio theory was enemy number 1. So why did he think it was demented? Well, because it's obsessed with things like beta, which is just a fancy term for how much a stock's price bounces around day to day. It's volatility. Munger thought this was completely insane. Who cares if a stock price wiggles around in the short term as long as the business underneath is strong and you bought it at a good price? For Berkshire, it was never about short-term zigs and zags. It was always about favorable odds and long-term value. But here's the thing about Munger. His thinking was never just about getting rich. It was always about how you do it. And he used his incredible platform to become this powerful ethical voice, what a lot of people started calling the conscience of the investment world. And he was absolutely relentless on a few key points. He called the way companies accounted for stock options corrupt, plain and simple. He constantly attacked the mutual fund industry for charging huge fees that just bleed their clients' returns dry. And he truly believed that building a company on a mountain of debt was just fundamentally irresponsible. He compared it to an engineer who knowingly builds a weak bridge. And to show he wasn't just talking, he'd often use this analysis from the founder of Vanguard, John Bogle. Look at this. Bogle showed that if the market gives you a 5% return, but all the layers of management fees and consulting fees add up to 3%, your actual take-home return is only 2%. I mean, think about that. The financial industry is pocketing more of the return than the actual person or foundation whose money is at risk. Munger thought that was a disgrace. Now, he and Buffett agreed on almost everything, but not absolutely everything. There was this one interesting point of disagreement on hostile takeovers. Buffett's view was simple. His loyalty was to the shareholders, period. But Munger had a slightly different take. He argued that when a company gets so massive that it becomes a huge social institution, there's a broader social interest to consider. He actually thought that sometimes it was right to have laws that prevented these takeovers, putting social stability ahead of pure shareholder profit. This very pragmatic sense of ethics also applied to what you might call vice stocks. People would point out that Berkshire once owned shares in a tobacco company. Munger's response was really nuanced. He drew a very sharp moral line. Passively owning a small piece of a public company is one thing. Having a controlling interest in actually running the business is something else entirely. He said Berkshire would never, ever want to be the controlling owner of a business that sells addictive drugs. It was a clear, practical, ethical boundary. And that really brings us to the most important thing to understand about Charlie Munger. For him, all these principles, clarity, rationality, inversion, ethics, they weren't just a manual for how to be a great investor. They were a complete blueprint for how to live a good, effective, and honorable life. He loved sharing his wisdom, especially with young people. He always preached this old-fashioned sense of duty. To whom much is given, much is expected. And he gave the most practical financial advice you'll ever hear. Always live below your means. It's not complicated, but it's the only way to build the kind of financial security that gives you freedom and options in life. And in the end, after all the success, all the billions, and all the influence, he never lost his incredible humility or his sense of humor. Someone once asked him what he actually did all day at Berkshire. He told this story about a friend of his in the army. His friend's boss was this useless guy named Captain Glotz. When a general asked his friend what his job was, he just said, "I help Captain Glotz." Munger paused and said, "That's the best way to describe what I do at Berkshire. It's just a perfect summary of the man. Brilliant, hilarious, and profoundly humble." All right, welcome to The Explainer. So today we're peeling back the layers on one of the titans of investing, Charlie Munger. But here's the thing. I want you to forget the buttoned-up, super rational investor you think you know, just for a little while. Because we're going to get into the philosopher, the family man, and, yeah, the guy who dropped millions on a party boat, basically just because he felt like it. So let's start our story. And we're not starting in some stuffy boardroom in Omaha. Nope. We're on a boat in Minnesota. Picture this. It's a beautiful August day, and Charlie Munger, he's got this glint in his eye. He's spotted a place on Little Rice Lake, and he is absolutely convinced it's the perfect spot to go fishing. Now, his wife, Nancy, she's a little more cautious. She's looking around and says, "Charlie, aren't we getting a little too close to the edge here?" But Charlie, oh, he's got it all figured out. He has this precise plan. He tells their stepson, "Okay, pull us in close to the reeds, let it drift just so, and then power back right before it gets too shallow." You know, in his head, this was a perfect genius-level move. And, well, that flawless maneuver, it fails. Instantly. A big gust of wind just shoves them right into this thick patch of wild rice. The motor's screaming, totally tangled up, and you can smell it burning. They are well and truly stuck. And his daughter Molly, what does she do? She doesn't even blink, just says, "Good thing I wore my swimsuit, ready to hop in and push." I mean, what a scene. Just a classic Munger family day out. So yeah, that whole scene on the boat, the big plan, the quick failure, the family just rolling with it, that really tells you a whole lot about the guy. But to get to the heart of what made Charlie Munger, well, Munger, we've got to look at the simple, incredibly powerful rules he lived by. Okay, get this. His number one rule for a happy life, and this is coming from a self-made billionaire, mind you, was to aim low. Seriously, it sounds kind of shocking, right? But it wasn't about giving up. It was about managing your expectations. He wanted to get to the end of his life and be able to say, you know, I knew what I was setting out to do, and I actually did it, and I did it well. And he applied that exact same logic to building wealth. He always said the absolute hardest part is getting that first 100 grand together. But after that, it's just like rolling a snowball down a really, really long hill. The secret sauce was dead simple. You got to start early, you have to consistently spend less than you make, and then you just let that snowball roll and grow for a very, very long time. But this whole philosophy, it went way beyond just money. It was really a framework for living. I mean, look at these tenets. He's saying, look, you have to be okay with failure. Life's going to throw problems at you. That's a given. The real trick isn't to have a million ideas. It's to really, truly master a few big, important concepts. And then, when one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities comes along because you've done the work, you have to have the guts to seize it and go big. Okay, but if you think that's the whole story, this super disciplined, rational guy, you're only getting half of it. To really see the other side of Charlie Munger, we need to talk to the people who saw him when the cameras were off. Let's talk about his family. So, you know that grumpy old man persona he had? The curmudgeon? Well, according to his daughter, Molly, that was pretty much all an act. She says it was like a running joke he had with himself, a kind of self-parody. He just picked that character and decided to play it. It wasn't who he really was. And you can totally see his personality in his kids, sometimes taken to the extreme. So Munger was famous for always having a book with him, right? Well, one time his daughter Emily was in an airport bookstore and she got so completely lost in a book that she missed her flight. And then they closed the entire terminal for the night and locked her inside. You can't make this stuff up. The apple, as they say, did not fall far from the tree. Right, so we've got the practical philosopher and we've got the quirky family guy. But honestly, nothing, and I mean nothing, can prepare you for the most illogical, over-the-top, and frankly amazing project of his entire life. A decision that just completely goes against everything he ever said he believed in. So in 1998, Munger just kind of casually drops this bomb. Oh, by the way, I'm building a boat, an 84-foot custom catamaran. And he's the one who calls it Munger's folly, right from the get-go. He's like, look, this makes zero economic sense. It's not an investment. It's a creative project. And the building process itself was absolute chaos. First, the shipyard he hired, he said they were a bunch of rogues, scallywags, and pirates. So what does a normal person do? Charlie Munger tells his friend, fire them all. Then they have to move this enormous, half-built boat, go rent a new piece of land, and build an entirely new shipyard from scratch, just for this one boat. And Munger's designing it himself, sending these hand-drawn sketches over the phone. It's just wild. And when this boat, the Channel Cat, was finally done, wow, this thing was the polar opposite of aiming low. This was no simple fishing boat. It was a floating, high-tech, luxury party palace. We're talking an unsinkable hull, a machine that could make 500 gallons of fresh water a day out of the ocean, a cooler for 4 kegs of beer, and, get this, a piece of custom-edged glass art that cost $55,000. So what's the final bill for all this? Well, Munger himself never said, but the best estimates put the total cost of his little folly at around $6 million. For the guy whose whole thing was underspend your income, this was a pretty big departure from the plan. So you're probably wondering, how did the grandmaster of rational investing justify this massive expense? The answer is, he didn't. He didn't even try. He flat out admitted, I've never in my life spent money so foolishly. His whole reason? He just said, what the hell, it was a creative thing to do. And that's it. That's all we get. And this is where we get to the real mystery of Charlie Munger, right? How do you reconcile these two completely different people in one man? You've got the super disciplined investor on one side, and then the guy who builds a multi-million-dollar boat just for fun on the other. How does that work? I mean, the contradiction here is just, it's huge. His whole philosophy was aim low, distrust your emotions, underspend your income, avoid being foolish. But his actions with the boat, he aimed for the stars, he gave in to a total whim, he spent like crazy, and he literally called it his folly. It's a complete 180. And the clue to solving this puzzle, it comes again from his daughter Molly. She basically says, what if we've been looking at him all wrong? What if Charlie Munger wasn't born a rational person? What if he was actually a very emotional person? And that incredible discipline he had, what if that wasn't just his personality, but his greatest achievement? The product of a whole life spent wrestling his own complex psyche and bringing it under control. This whole idea of a man who's a mix of intense logic and deep self-awareness, it all comes together perfectly in one last story about him. So, the boat is finally done. Munger is walking through a parking lot with his friend King Williams, the guy who oversaw the whole chaotic build. All of a sudden, a car just shoots backward right at them. Williams yells, yanks Charlie out of the way just in the nick of time. He says, Charlie, I'd never let anything happen to you. And Munger's response, without missing a single beat, is just pure Charlie Munger. He snaps back, then you're walking on my wrong side. It was this dry joke about his blind left eye, a life or death moment, and he immediately turns it into a practical lesson about where his friend should stand. I mean, that's the man right there. And he had that same kind of dark, practical humor about his own death. People would ask him what he thought he'd leave behind, and he had this standard, morbid little joke he'd tell. The answer, he'd say, is simple. He left it all. You know, he spent his life building this massive financial snowball, but he was always completely clear on the fact that when your time is up, you don't get to take any of it with you. And I think that really gets to the ultimate lesson from his incredible life. See, Munger wasn't some kind of robot, born without emotion. He was a man who worked tirelessly to build a system to master himself. And that boat, that glorious, expensive folly, it's the ultimate proof that rationality, for him, was a tool, not a prison. Which leaves us with this final question to think about. What do we really gain, and what might we lose when we bring our own emotions under that kind of control? For Charlie Munger, it seems like the ultimate reward for a lifetime of discipline was finally earning the right and having the wisdom to know exactly when to throw it all out the window.
All right, today we are diving into a truly legendary story of investment genius. It's about a 14-year battle that's basically hidden in plain sight, right inside a single page of data. It's really a masterclass in risk, reward, and, the psychology of what it takes to beat the market. So let's pull back the curtain and see what we can learn.
So, think of this like a prize fight. In one corner, you've got the challenger, a pretty much unknown investment firm at the time called the Wheeler-Munger Partnership. And in the other corner, you have the undisputed champion, the benchmark for the entire U.S. economy, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. This is the ultimate David versus Goliath story told entirely through numbers.
So where do you even start with a 14-year financial war? Well, you go straight to the source. We're going to break down the story that's hiding inside this simple table of numbers and really see what it can teach us about strategy, about temperament, and frankly, about sheer will.
And this is it. This is our whole map for today's explainer. I know it might not look like much, but trust me, every single number on this page tells a piece of a much larger, much more dramatic story. A story of absolutely incredible highs, some terrifying lows, and an unwavering belief in a strategy.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The partnership didn't just want to, edge out the market by a little bit. No, they came out of the gate swinging for the fences, aiming for these spectacular knockout returns. And for a while there, it seemed like they just couldn't miss.
Just look at this. In 1963, only its second year operating, the partnership posted a return of 71.7%. I mean, that's just staggering. To give you some perspective, the Dow Jones, the market itself, had a great year, returning a very respectable 20.6%. Munger's partnership more than tripled it, left it in the dust.
And no, it was not a fluke. Just a few years later, 1967, they did it again. A massive 56.2% gain. Now, the market was up a healthy 19%, which is great, but the partnership, well, they were just playing a different game entirely.
So what you're seeing here isn't just a string of lucky hits. It's a clear pattern. These are not small, incremental wins. These are explosive, outsized victories. And it was all because of a very specific strategy, making huge, concentrated bets. Instead of spreading their money thin across hundreds of stocks, they poured massive amounts of capital into just a handful of companies they deeply, deeply believed were undervalued. But as we're about to see, a strategy this powerful, it always has a dark side.
And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because the very same philosophy that produces those incredible euphoric highs, it also creates terrifying lows. This was not a smooth ride to the top. It was a violent, stomach-churning roller coaster.
Let me just ask you something. Forget the numbers for a second, and just think about the feeling. Put yourself in the investor's shoes. You've trusted someone with your life savings, and in 1 year, almost a third of it just vanishes. How do you react? What do you do? Do you panic? Do you sell?
This timeline really lays out the whole wild ride. You've got these incredible peaks, like 63 and later on in 75. But then you hit these deep, dark valleys. And look at 66. That's interesting. The Dow was down almost 16%, but the partnership was actually up. It shows they weren't just following the market. But then came the real test. Look at 1973 and 1974. See, that's the deal you make when you chase extraordinary returns. You have to be willing to accept the real possibility of extraordinary pain. And in 1973, that pain arrived in a big way. In 1973, the partnership lost almost 32% of its value. Now, the market was down that year too, but only by about 13%. So investors in the partnership lost more than double what a simple market investor would have. Can you imagine the pressure, the phone calls? And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, the very next year, it happens again. Another loss. This time, over 31%. I mean, think about that. Living through 1 year like that is hard enough. But 2? 2 years in a row? That's the point where sheer terror and panic take over for most people.
And you have to understand, this is the crucial point. For 99% of people, the story would have ended right here. Investors would have pulled all their money out, the manager would have lost his nerve, and the whole thing would have shut down. This is the ultimate test, not just of an investment strategy, but of the character of the people behind it.
So, after 14 years of these dizzying peaks and absolutely terrifying troughs, it is time to tally the final score. After all that chaos, who actually came out on top in this epic financial showdown?
So after all the drama, right, all the volatility, all the years of feeling like a genius and the years of feeling like an absolute fool, what did it all add up to? What was the final result of this 14-year war? And here's the answer. Over the full 14-year period from 1962 to 1975, the Dow Jones Industrial Average returned an average of 6.4% a year, a respectable number. The Wheeler-Munger partnership, an average of 24.3% per year.
Just let that sink in for a second. It wasn't a narrow victory. It wasn't even close. It was an absolute rout. By being willing to endure that gut-wrenching volatility, the partnership delivered nearly 4 times the average annual return of the market. The long-term reward was astronomical.
So what's the big lesson here? What should we take away from all this? This record, it's not just about picking good stocks. It's about a much deeper philosophy, a different way of thinking about risk and reward. It's really about understanding the genius of volatility.
Now, the strategy we've been watching has a name. It's called the pursuit of asymmetric returns. It's a fancy term for a simple, but really powerful idea. You willingly accept a high probability of short-term pain and crazy swings because you're focused on the potential for long-term rewards that are so huge, they're completely out of proportion to the risk you took.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It captures the whole thing. Everybody wants those incredible, life-changing long-term returns, but very, very few are willing to pay the price. And the price isn't paid in dollars. It's paid in sleepless nights, in second-guessing yourself, and in the emotional courage to stick with your plan when everyone else is sprinting for the exits.
And that really is the ultimate question this whole story leaves us with. It's one thing to look at the final numbers on a chart and admire the genius. That's easy. But the real question is a personal one. You have to ask yourself, do you have the psychological fortitude, the temperament, the guts to actually sit through a ride like that to get the reward?
You know, when you read a really great biography, it feels like this massive, perfectly built structure. But have you ever stopped to wonder what it's actually made of? What are the bricks and mortar? Well, today, we're going to go behind the scenes. We've got a really unique document, the full interview list for Damn Right, the biography of the legendary Charlie Munger. And trust me, this isn't just some boring appendix. It's the secret blueprint for how you build a life story.
I mean, seriously, think about it. How would you do it? How do you take a life filled with so much complexity, so many relationships, all those critical decisions, and somehow get it all down on paper? It feels almost impossible, doesn't it? Where do you even begin?
Well, here's the secret. It turns out you don't just tell a person's story. You have to literally rebuild their entire world. And you do that piece by piece, one conversation at a time, by talking to every single person who was there in that world with them. So this list that we're about to tear apart, don't think of it as just a list of names. No, this is the architect's plan. Every name on here is a pillar holding the whole thing up. Every single conversation is a brick in the foundation of this incredible story.
All right, let's dive right in. If you want to understand any structure, you gotta start with the cornerstone, right? And in this biography, that is, without a doubt, the man himself, Charles T. Munger. And what you see right away is the level of access the author had. It's just mind-blowing.
Just look at this list for a second. Look at the places. Omaha, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, even a remote island up in Minnesota. And it's not just once. It's over and over again. This wasn't some quick, one-and-done interview. This was a pilgrimage, a marathon of conversations that crisscrossed the entire country to make sure they got the whole picture.
And it all adds up to this number, 9. 9 separate, in-depth sit-downs with Munger himself. That is a staggering number. It tells you everything you need to know about this project. This wasn't some arm's-length academic exercise. This was a deep, deep dive. The kind of personal access that, frankly, most biographers can only dream about.
And check out this timeline. We're talking about a 4-year-long conversation. Now think about what that means. The author wasn't just getting a single snapshot in time. They could go back year after year,
ask new questions as their own research got deeper, and really see how Munger's perspective changed. That is how you capture nuance. That's how you get the stuff that a single interview would miss every single time.
Okay, so point one is clear. Unbelievable access to the man himself. But that's just the center of the web, isn't it? You can't truly understand a person in a vacuum. You have to map out their entire ecosystem. And that always starts with the people who are closest to them, their family.
And you can see here, the author knew this inside and out. They didn't just talk to Charlie Munger. They interviewed the whole Munger constellation, his wife, Nancy, every one of his kids, his sister. Each of these people holds a totally different piece of the puzzle. They have a perspective on him that, let's be honest, he probably doesn't even have on himself.
And this chart just drives that point home in a huge way. A full quarter, 1 out of every 4 people interviewed for this book had the last name Munger. Let that sink in for a second. That's a massive commitment. And it tells you that the biographer understood a fundamental truth. To get the real story of the public icon, you have to start with the private man. So from that tight inner circle of family, the investigation just explodes outward. And what you find is, well, it's nothing short of staggering. This isn't just a story about a man and his family. This is about a network of people who literally shaped modern American business.
I mean, of course, where else are you going to start? You have to talk to Warren Buffett. It's just non-negotiable. You literally cannot tell the story of one without the other. Getting his take right from the horse's mouth in Omaha is absolutely essential.
But then, boom, you see a name like Katharine Graham. The Katharine Graham, publisher of the Washington Post. All of a sudden, this isn't just a book about investing anymore, is it? Just this one name on the list shows you that Munger's world, his orbit, went way beyond Wall Street. We're talking about the highest echelons of American media and power.
And then you get James Sinegal, the guy who founded Costco. Now, if you know anything about Munger, you know he was obsessed with brilliant business models, and Costco was like his Mona Lisa. So talking to the founder, that's a direct line into Munger's brain. It's how you understand what he thought made a business truly great.
And when you zoom out and look at the whole list, you see guys like Otis Booth, Rick Guerin, Louis Simpson. You start to get it. This isn't just a network. It's a map of power, of intellect, of influence, stretching across decades of American history. It's a universe.
Okay, but there's one more layer of data hidden in this list that I think is just fascinating, and that's the geography. Because where these interviews happened tells its own story. It maps out the physical, and maybe even the psychological, centers of Munger's world.
This table really lays it out. You've got Omaha, obviously. That's the heart of the Buffett partnership. You've got Los Angeles, his home base, where he built his own career. You've got D.C. for a power player like Katharine Graham. But then, and this is the one that gets me, Star Island, Minnesota, a private family retreat, getting an interview there, wow, that speaks to an incredible level of trust.
And this chart just gives you the visual. California is clearly the epicenter, right? That's where he lived and worked for so much of his life. But look at Nebraska and Minnesota. They're these major secondary hubs. One represents his legendary business partnership, and the other represents his private family life. It's his whole life, right there in 3 states.
So let's put all the pieces together. We've looked at the who, the when, the where. So what does this simple interview list really tell us about the craft? About what it takes to write a truly great biography?
Well, it shows you it's a 4-part strategy. First, you have to get deep, repeated access to your main subject. No shortcuts. Second, you have to put family first, because their story is your subject's story. Third, you've got to map out that entire universe of influence to understand their true impact. And finally, you follow the geographic trail, because it tells you the story of their journey.
In the end, what this list proves is that a great biography isn't a monologue. It's not one person talking. It's a symphony. It's a whole chorus of different voices from every single chapter of a person's life. And the biographer's job? They're the conductor, the one who has to weave all those different voices into one beautiful, cohesive story.
And that kind of leaves us with one last question, a personal one. If someone were going to write the story of your life, who would be on that list? Who are the pillars that hold up your world? Who are the people that hold the pieces of your story that maybe even you've forgotten? It's really something to think about, isn't it?
Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's talk about the man Warren Buffett himself called his true partner, Charles T. Munger. He was the quiet, brilliant co-architect behind Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most powerful financial empires on the planet. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how he helped build it. I mean, it's a heck of a question, right? How does a lawyer from Omaha end up as the co-architect of a multi-billion-dollar global empire? It doesn't just happen. So we're going to dig into the key decisions, the absolutely pivotal partnerships, and the unique strategies that turned a super shirk legal mind into a flat-out investing legend. Let's get into it. Okay, here's how we're going to break this story down. First up, we'll look at how Munger laid his own foundation long before Berkshire. Then, we'll get into the game-changing partnership with Warren Buffett. After that, we'll see how they forged the Berkshire engine, dive into their golden age of major deals, and finally, we'll take a look at the incredible legacy he left behind. You know, you can't build a skyscraper without a rock-solid foundation. And for Charlie Munger, that foundation, maybe surprisingly, didn't start in finance. It started in a law office, and with his first few ventures into the world of business. So take a look at this. On the surface, he's a successful lawyer out in Los Angeles. But look closer. There's this whole other track running in parallel. While he's practicing law, he's also starting a financial company and getting into real estate development. This is the key thing right here, because it tells you everything you need to know about his mindset. From the very beginning, he was already thinking like an owner, like an investor, not just a guy billing hours. And this is where everything changes. We're at the crucial turning point, the formation of that legendary partnership with Warren Buffett. And look, this wasn't just two buddies getting together. This was the start of a collaboration that would literally redefine what a modern corporation could even be. So where do these two geniuses start their empire building? A high-flying tech firm? A big Wall Street bank? Nope. They start with a trading stamp company called Blue Chip Stamps. You know, the little stamps you used to get at the grocery store? Munger, Buffett, and their buddy Rick Oren saw something nobody else did. They saw that this boring little company could be the perfect vehicle to start buying up other businesses. So they start buying, and they just keep buying. By the end of '75, they had managed to get their hands on 36.5% of the company. Now, why does that number matter? Well, it's not a majority, not yet. But what it is a huge lever. With over a third of the company, you have a massive voice at the table. You can start pushing things in the direction you want them to go. But of course, they weren't going to stop there. Just 4 years later, boom, 58%. That's the magic number. That's game over. Once you cross that 50% threshold, you're in charge, period. Blue Chip Stamps was now officially part of their growing empire, completely under their control. And here's the end result of all that quiet, patient buying: total control. Munger becomes the chairman, and this is the genius part. They transform Blue Chip from a stamp company into their own private platform for acquisitions. It became their first real holding company. And this little playbook, they were about to run it again on a much, much bigger scale.
All right, so they've got their strategy down pat. They've proven the concept. Now it's time for the main event. Their focus shifts to, of all things, a failing textile manufacturer in Massachusetts called Berkshire Hathaway.
And they ran the exact same play, just with way higher stakes. It was so methodical. Step 1, start buying up shares of the struggling company. Step 2, keep buying until you have enough to take complete control. And then step 3, this is the gutsiest move of all, they started selling off the dying textile business and completely remade the company into a holding company, a shell designed for one thing: to buy other great businesses. Okay, this next part, this is the secret sauce, for real. Because a holding company is just an empty bucket without cash to put in it. They needed a money machine, and they found the perfect one in the insurance industry. Think about it like this. You pay your car insurance premium every month, right? But your insurance company might hold on to that money for years before you ever have an accident and they have to pay a claim. All that cash just sitting there in the meantime. That's called the float. And they realized they could take that massive pile of cash and invest it for themselves. It's just brilliant. And this is how it all started. For just $8.6 million, they bought a company called National Indemnity. Now, $8.6 million sounds like a lot, but for what they were building, it was an absolute steal. This was the first domino in what would become a colossal insurance empire, the financial engine that would power everything that came next. So now they've got this incredible cash engine all fired up. What do? They go on a shopping spree. All through the 70s, they used that insurance float to buy up big chunks of fantastic businesses. You've got a solid bank, the legendary Washington Post, Munger's own old company, Wesco, a media powerhouse. They were laying the foundation brick by brick for the Berkshire we know today. And then comes this moment in 1985. It's kind of like tearing down the old family farmhouse to build a skyscraper on the land. By shutting down the original textile mills for good, they were sending a crystal clear message to the world. The past is the past. We are not a textile company anymore. We are a world-class investment vehicle. Full stop.
Okay, so the foundation is set. The insurance engine is roaring. Now we enter the golden age. This is when Munger and Buffett start going after huge established companies, businesses with what they called a durable competitive advantage. Basically, a powerful brand or a market position so strong that it's like a castle with a moat around it that nobody can cross. And one of their first really big moves was to buy a company called Scott and Fetzer. Now, they didn't just buy a piece of it. They bought the whole thing. And it was this wild collection of brands, World Book encyclopedias, and Kirby vacuum cleaners. And here's a fun little tidbit. They famously snatched this deal right out from under the nose of one of the biggest sharks on Wall Street at the time, Ivan Boesky. And they did it for $315 million. I mean, just think about that for a second. We've gone from an $8.6 million insurance company just a few years earlier to dropping over $300 million on a single deal. They were playing in a totally different league now, for real. And what's so incredible is how they could operate in two completely different worlds at the same time. On one side, you've got them navigating the shark-infested waters of Wall Street investment banking with Salomon Brothers, a deal that eventually netted them about $1.7 billion. And on the other side, they're buying into a company whose products you probably have in your bathroom cabinet right now, Gillette. And that deal, Charlie Munger himself personally led those negotiations. And the buying spree just didn't stop. I mean, look at this list. A jewelry store, a shoe company, a company that trains airline pilots for $1.6 billion, and Dairy Queen. You just can't make this stuff up. It looks completely random, but to them, it wasn't random at all. Each one of these was a high-quality, durable business. This whole eclectic mix is exactly how they built the modern Berkshire Hathaway. So, after all that buying, all that building, over all those decades, what are we left with? What does this incredible structure they built, this finished edifice, actually look like? Well, it's a story of patience, partnership, and a kind of stewardship you just don't see much anymore. And you know, Munger's legacy isn't just about the deals he made at Berkshire. He took that incredible brain of his and applied it elsewhere. He famously jumped onto the board of a struggling U.S. Airlines to try and help turn it around. And he also spent years as a trustee for a school in Los Angeles. It just shows that for him, it wasn't only about making money. It was about a broader commitment to making the institutions around him better. So when you zoom all the way out, from that young lawyer in LA all the way to this global powerhouse, you see it, don't you? You can see the pattern. It's a story about seeing value where nobody else did, about partnering with people you trust implicitly, and about having the incredible patience to just build something piece by piece over decades. Which, of course, brings us to the big question, the one that really matters for us today. They built this empire on principles, on patience, on partnerships, on handshakes. But could you do it again? I mean, really? In today's world of algorithms, high-frequency trading, and stocks that fly up and crash in a single day, is that model even possible anymore? It's something to think about. Let's talk about Charlie Munger. Now, you might know him as Warren Buffett's longtime partner, but he was so much more than that. He was, I think, a true philosopher of practical thinking. And he had a secret weapon, a concept he called worldly wisdom. And it's not about being a book-smart genius in one little area. No, it's about having a whole toolkit of mental models, ideas pulled from every major discipline. Today, we're going to see exactly how powerful that toolkit can be. So let's jump right in. We're going to get our hands dirty with a thought experiment that Munger himself created to show his method in action. And I want you to think of this less as a business case study and more as a workout for your brain, a way of thinking you can use on pretty much any big challenge you're ever going to face. Okay, picture this. The year is 1884. You're in Atlanta, Georgia. Some rich, eccentric guy walks up and hands you $2 million, a fortune back then, with one condition. You have to start a beverage company called Coca-Cola, and your job is to come up with a plan to turn that $2 million into $2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. It sounds completely impossible, right? But what we're about to see is that if you have the right mental tools, the path forward isn't just clear, it's almost logical. To solve a problem this massive, you can't just think in one way, right? You can't just be a marketing guy or just a finance guy. You need a bigger approach. You need what Munger famously called a latticework of mental models.
Basically, a powerful set of tools from different fields that lets you see the problem from every possible angle. So here they are. These are the 5 core ideas Munger said were absolutely essential for clear thinking. Now, when you look at them, they might seem a little, well, simple, almost like common sense. But here's the key. Munger's genius wasn't in knowing these things. It was in taking them incredibly, incredibly seriously. And these 5 notions are the exact tools we're going to use to build our $2 trillion company. Now, this one, Inversion, this was one of Munger's absolute favorites. He borrowed it from a brilliant 19th century mathematician. And the idea is just, well, it's simple, but it's a game changer. Instead of always asking, how can we succeed, you spend just as much time asking, what would guarantee we fail? And then you just avoid that stuff at all costs. It sounds backward, but Munger thought it was one of the most powerful and most underused mental tricks in the world. All right, enough with the theory. Let's put the toolkit to work. Let's walk through Munger's own solution to the Coca-Cola problem and see how these ideas can come together to build a $2 trillion empire right from scratch. Okay, first tool from the kit, simplify. Let's just solve the big, obvious questions first, the no-brainers. First, you're going to need a powerful brand name that you can legally protect. You can't build an empire on a generic product. Second, you're not going to get to $2 trillion by just selling in America. So the plan from day one has to be global domination. And third, the product itself needs to tap into some kind of basic, elemental human desire. Next up, tool number 2, quantify. Let's run some quick back-of-the-napkin numbers to see if this is even in the realm of possibility. Okay, so fast forward 150 years. The world has about 8 billion people. Munger figured if the company could capture just a fraction of all the liquid people drink every day, you could get to about 2.92 times trillion 8-ounce servings a year. Now, if you make just 4 cents of profit on each one of those servings, boom, there's your $2 trillion. So the scale is insane, but the math actually works. And now we get to the crucial insight. This is the big mental leap. Munger says you have to reframe the entire business. You are not in the business of selling flavored sugar water. You are in the business of creating and maintaining conditioned reflexes. This is straight out of a Psychology 101 textbook. The brand, Coca-Cola, is the stimulus. And the response you want to create, automatically, is purchase and consumption. So how do you create those reflexes? Well, you pull 2 of the biggest levers in all of psychology. First, operant conditioning. You make the product itself a reward. The sugar provides energy, the caffeine gives a lift, the flavor is pleasing, the cold temperature is refreshing, and you make that reward available absolutely everywhere, so the habit is easy to reinforce. At the same time, you pull the second lever, Pavlovian conditioning. You use advertising to relentlessly associate your brand with every positive image and feeling you can think of. Happiness, fun, beauty, success. Your brain just starts to fuse the brand with the good feelings. But you don't stop there. You then layer on a third massive psychological force, social proof. Munger loved to call this the monkey see, monkey do tendency. It's just a fundamental part of our nature. When we see lots of other people doing something, we instinctively think it must be a good thing to do. So the more people who drink Coke, the more other people want to drink it. It becomes a massive, self-reinforcing loop. And this is where Munger's 5th notion comes in, the really big one. When you combine these powerful psychological forces, the rewarding product, the positive associations, and the overwhelming social proof, they don't just add together, they multiply each other, they compound. Munger had his own special term for this, a Lollapalooza effect. It's like a chemical reaction that just starts feeding on itself, creating this incredible, unstoppable, exponential growth. Okay, so finally, we pull out our inversion tool. We've got our plan for success. Now let's ask, what could absolutely destroy this whole thing? What are the dumb mistakes we have to avoid? 1, don't have a cloying aftertaste. You want people to be able to drink it all day long. 2, you have to defend that trademark with everything you've got. 3, avoid making people envious. You do that by being obsessed with quality and value. And 4, and this is the absolute crucial one, once you've spent a century building all this psychological conditioning around a specific flavor, whatever you do, do not make a sudden, drastic change to it. You know, that last point seems so blindingly obvious in hindsight, doesn't it? The funny thing is, Munger's whole plan is built on these elementary ideas from basic college courses, which is precisely why what actually happened in the real world is so staggering and such a powerful lesson. Because in 1985, the very real, very brilliant executives running the actual Coca-Cola company, surrounded by the smartest consultants and advisors money could buy, did the one thing our model says is corporate suicide. They changed the formula. They took a century of psychological conditioning and just tossed it in the trash, nearly destroying the most valuable brand on earth in the process.
So what on earth did they miss? They missed another simple, basic concept from psychology, one Munger calls deprival superreaction syndrome. It's the simple idea that people react with irrational, intense anger when you take something away from them that they feel they own. The public backlash wasn't really about taste. It was an emotional firestorm because people felt like something that was a part of their lives, their memories, was being stolen from them.
And for Charlie Munger, this wasn't just a business blunder. It was a damning indictment of our entire educational system. The fact that the smartest people in the room with the most prestigious degrees could make such a fundamental Psych 101 error, well, that pointed to a massive gap in their education. They had deep knowledge in narrow silos, but they had absolutely no worldly wisdom.
So, this brings us to the most important part of all. What's the lesson here for us? How do we avoid making our own version of the new Coke blunder? How do we avoid these massive, colossal blind spots in our own thinking, whether it's in our jobs or just in our lives? Munger argued that the root of the problem is something he called the man with a hammer tendency. You've heard the saying, to a man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Our modern world pushes us, rewards us for becoming extreme specialists. And that's great for solving very narrow problems. But it turns experts into people who only have one tool, and they try to solve every complex problem with that single tool, completely missing the bigger picture. This specialization creates what the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead brilliantly called the fatal unconnectedness of academic disciplines. Think about it. A powerful idea like deprival superreaction syndrome is trapped over in the psychology department. Meanwhile, the business school is teaching financial models that assume people are perfectly rational robots. The big, useful ideas are stuck in their own silos, and the dots are never connected in the real world.
So what's Munger's solution? It's powerful, it's elegant, but it isn't easy. He says you have to take personal responsibility for your own education. You have to go out and intentionally learn the big, enduring ideas from all the major fields. Not to become an expert in everything, but just to build that latticework of mental models inside your own head. And then you have to practice, all the time, using this full toolkit to look at problems, just like a pilot who spends countless hours in a simulator preparing for anything that could possibly go wrong.
And that's really the final, powerful challenge that Charlie Munger leaves us with. Your mind is a toolbox. The question is, what's inside it? To become truly wise, to avoid the kind of catastrophic errors that even the smartest specialists make, you have to do the hard work of filling that toolbox with models from every discipline. Because in the end, worldly wisdom isn't about having the sharpest hammer. It's about knowing when the job actually calls for a wrench, or a screwdriver, or a saw.